My guest this week is Kelly Carlin, daughter of the legendary comedian George Carlin. Kelly is an author and a speaker whose work connects many of the dots her father's life was all about. I've known Kelly for about 4 years now after connecting with her on Twitter because of how much I admired her dad. We've become great friends. Kelly has welcomed me into her world and the comedy community she's part of here in LA. I thought Kelly would be the perfect guest this week, not only because of her new book about growing up as a Carlin, but also because of all the issues her father's comedy was about that have become central themes of what we do here on this show. George Carlin was a relentless defender of free speech, using words and language to push the limits of what society found acceptable at the time. He railed against political correctness like no other comic before or anybody since. He dissected the absurdities of life that ultimately bring us together rather than rip us apart. I can't tell you how often I'm watching some campaign nonsense or some ridiculous politically correct crusade and think, man, I wish George Carlin was still alive to tackle this.
Republicans, they would have wanted to do more in public. You know it didn't go well for them when they want to hide the next several dozen interviews. He said at the end, the private ones always produce better results. I mean, the things you're not seeing, we nailed those. Those were awesome. The things you saw, yeah, there we seem to have sucked. But trust me that when we go private from now on and you can't see them anymore, that's gonna be terrific. When you're the one hiding, good chance you lost. A little bit of a bitch move. Okay. Is that an acceptable thing to say? I don't know. We move forward. Please don't watch anymore. Yeah, when's the last time a politician asked you to stop watching? Right? Yeah, the last time they lost. This is the exact answer. Alright, anyway, we move on to Trump. Okay. So Donald Trump seems to be saying some outrageous things. I don't think any of you missed it, right? Yeah, the Mexicans coming in are criminals or rapists, and Megyn Kelly's bleeding out of her thing, and then, it goes on and on. I prefer people who weren't captured by the Vietnamese. I mean, there's no end to it, right? So does he know that he's being divisive, that he's pitting, for example, Latino immigrants against the rest of the country? When he questions President Obama's citizenship, is there a racial angle to that, especially when he says, I don't believe he went to Columbia. In other words, I don't think he could be smart enough to go to Columbia. He wanted to see his long-form transcript. Is that divisive? Well, it seems obvious to us, but don't worry, you don't have to trust us anymore. You can just ask Donald Trump himself, and that's what they did on ABC's This Week, and listen to what he had to say.
I was against 16 other candidates, and, I'm being divisive right now because I want to win. I know how to win. That's what I have to do.
The amazing thing about Trump is that he doesn't know any better to not say that. So he doesn't sound like a normal politician, because a normal politician would be guarded with things that are obviously a problem, right? So he's like, I'm the demagogue. I'm the one being divisive. Later, I'll say, it's Hillary Clinton. You can't elect her. She's so divisive. But he just told you he's doing it on purpose for politics so he can win. Amazing. A demagogue who is accidentally honest. So now, that's kind of a fun thing when this guy doesn't know any better and he blurts out his political strategy, which is to divide the country. I mean, these are weird times when that's slightly fun. It stops being fun when it gets real. And when does it get real? Well, when you have violence, for example. So they're doing a Trump rally in Miami. Some protesters go in, but really, all they're doing was, they had a sign, this Ariel Rojas had a sign that said equality. And apparently a sign by Latinos saying equality was deeply offensive to the Trump supporters. So now I'm about to show you a video where it gets real. One of the Trump supporters grabs the guy, assaults him, drags him out. At the end, the cops seem to help him along, and then listen to the chant in the background as they're assaulting this lone Latino man who had the temerity put up a sign that said equality. Watch. this is the beginning of fascism. When you have a guy who's assaulted, who's exercising his First Amendment rights, and as inoffensively as you could possibly imagine, and he gets assaulted like that, and with a crowd chanting in the background, USA, USA. Oh man, how does that not give a chill down your spine? Like, we're now chanting as we assault people from a different background. I mean, I assume Rojas is an American citizen just like any of us. And it doesn't matter. He's Latino. He's Latino and he has fight for equality. And what does the Trump campaign say? Well, the guy in the pink shirt, he's not an official part of the campaign. He was merely an attendee. He had another wink and a nod. I didn't say don't do it. So if you see a Latino guy among us, kick his ass, throw him out, and the crowd will chant along with you. Now, look, in the past, if you said fascism, the mainstream media would jump all over you and, how dare you be respectful of the right wing? You're not allowed to say that. Oh, right? Well, what the hell was that? What have we become? That you can start pounding on protesters, pounding on people that are different than you. And this is not the first time. You had his supporters, two drunk guys up in Boston, kick the living hell out of a poor homeless guy. They don't know whether he's a citizen or not, but he was Latino. They're good enough. Good enough. Let's kick the crap out of him, right? They asked Trump about it, and he says, some of my supporters are very passionate. Well, when you encourage that kind of violence against another, I've seen that movie before, and that movie is called Fascism. It doesn't end well. So, a lot of people entertained by Donald Trump, reality contestant, hey, you know what, some of the other Republicans are worse when it comes to their ideology or their policy positions. I hear you. But this is not fun. This is not entertaining. It's real. God help us if this guy's president, and then he starts doing this to anybody who dares protest him. Physical violence, intimidation. Let us avoid these beginnings so we can avoid those ends. That is a great quote by Sandra Day O'Connor. He was a Republican on the Supreme Court appointed by Ronald Reagan, and she warned about the totalitarian state rising here in their attack against the judiciary. Now they've taken it to a whole new level, where they're being divisive on purpose, and physically so. If we don't put an end to this, man, it's going to put an end to us. We got to get up and fight back. I don't mean in the stupid right-wing fascist way that they do, but I mean politically. Get up. Get up. We're not going to let them drag us out of places. And we don't start that fight when it's too late. We start it right now. You want to push us around? No. That's not how we're going to play this game, okay? So, first of all, and I'm saying everything we do is by the law, because we stand for the rule of law, we stand for the American way. They're the ones who are knuckle draggers, mouth breathers, that are trying to do violence. That guy in the pink shirt, the authorities of Miami should immediately find him and arrest him, and he should get a very significant jail sentence. That was the most clear assault I have ever seen. Can anyone argue that was not assault? He's not a cop. He's not anybody. He just grabbed the guy and threw him to the ground while everybody else cheered on. No. We have to have rule of law in this country. If we don't have rule of law, this thing spirals out of control. That man should be arrested immediately. Miami police, where the hell are you? Or are you just going to let people get assaulted in Miami without doing anything about it? Or are there two different rules here? One set of rules for white Republicans and another set for Latinos. Is that really going to stand in Miami? If you don't arrest that guy, apparently you think it's okay to beat down Latinos in Miami. And if you think that, everyone in the Miami Police Department should be fired. Young Turks. Alright, back on the Young Turks. Let me read some tweets for you guys. Jay Hansen writes in, am I the only one who thinks Gowdy looks like a human pencil? Like a pencil with a human face drawn on the eraser and ears glued on? No, you're not the only one. That's an excellent analysis of what Trey Gowdy looks like. That might not be relevant, but it is the case. Wes Parker then goes on to say, did Trey Gowdy used to work for Santa? Also funny. Also not necessarily relevant. I denounce and reject you guys as I continue to read your tweets. The other Russert writes in, Trey Gowdy is shocked that someone would use this committee for political grandstanding. Hashtag at long last, sir. That's very funny. Keep it real. Of course, that's what those committee hearings wind up being, political grandstanding. Okay. I got more anger for you in a second. First, let's do one more Donald Trump story, which is more preposterous than infuriating, and then we'll go on to Ben Carson and get angry again. Okay. Donald Trump was recently asked, hey, has anyone ever told you no? We got a little short video on that, and then I'll give you the full quote. Let's watch.
Life really has been a no, and I fought through it.
I've been told no many times. I mean, my whole life really has been a no, and I fought through it. Your whole life's been a no, really. Your father was worth $200 million. You went to all the best schools, and I wouldn't mind seeing your long-form transcripts to see whether you earned those schools or not. And you were given pretty much anything your heart desired. Your whole life was a no. Oh, God, man, the arrogance is astounding. But it's about to get worse. He says, it's not been easy for me. It has not been easy for me, you know. I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. Can you believe he says that with a straight face? But that's the thing. People live in their own bubbles. And in Trump's bubble, he's the victim of everybody saying no to him. And why didn't they just give him the money right away, right in the beginning? Oh, you're right, his dad did. But still, I mean, in the beginning he struggled. He only got a small loan of $1 million when he's coming out of Brooklyn. Okay, also enormously untrue. I'll get to that in a second. Well, then Matt Lauer asked him about that, and he at least acknowledged, oh, yeah, kind of right, that's not that small if you're...
You said it hasn't been easy for you, but my dad gave me $1 million loan. That probably is going to seem pretty easy to a lot of people.
Yeah, okay, I guess it's $1 million. It's actual money to you guys. It was nothing to me growing up. We had millions everywhere. He said, but $1 million isn't very much compared to what I built. I've built one of the great companies. Well, one company that he has now, the other 4 companies he built went to bankruptcy. So those weren't so great. He was bailed out partly by our laws here in America, the U.S. government bailing his house out by having those laws in place in the first place to bail him out. But let's get to the heart of the issue. You know what his dad actually left him? He didn't give him $1 million small. That was in the beginning when he was a kid. That was basically his allowance, okay? No, his dad, according to reporting on this, left him anywhere between $40 to $200 million. He took over his dad's organization, which was worth $200 million. But let's be conservative and say that his dad actually gave money to his siblings as well, and gave it an equal share, even though Donald Trump was running the organization. Even in the most conservative estimate, his dad just flat out gave him $40 million and a giant business. He says, it was all me, man. I fought through all the no's, and I'm the hero. I built the business. I built that. By the way, his dad made the fortune in the first place by getting loans from the U.S. government, Federal Housing Administration. The arrogance of these guys knows no bounds. He just spit in your eye right there. What are you going to do about it? You're going to go out there and be like, oh, yes, boss. Yeah, I'm going to vote for you. You're the billionaire. Yeah, I'm going to do that. And that is what his Republican base is doing right now. Oh, he's the boss. He's the boss. Yeah. Oh, he had it tough. He only had $1 million loan from his dad when he was in high school. And then later only got $40 million. Oh, yeah. Oh, boss. You're $1 billion. That's why, oh, yeah, you're a billionaire. I'm going to vote for you. And then they add, of course, you know, he spits on you, and the Republican base thinks that it's raining. And they're like, oh, good. we needed this right around here. Finally, it's trickling down. Idiots. In the words of Donald Trump, dum-dums. You gonna vote for this guy? Have at it, Hoss. Okay, now we go to Ben Carson. Okay. Lately, Ben Carson's been doing pretty well in the polls in Iowa. Now, if you remember, Republican voters in Iowa are very religious, so his religious spiel works really well for them. Pat Robertson did well in the Iowa caucuses and then flamed out everywhere else. I suspect the same thing is going to happen to Ben Carson. And if you don't know, this entire presidential run for Ben Carson is just a profit-making scheme. He interrupted his candidacy for a couple of weeks while he is number one in Iowa and number two nationwide. So he could be the next president of the United States. He interrupted that for 2 weeks to go on a book tour. Now, book tours are planned well ahead of time. Did you think that they didn't know the book tour would be right in the middle of his campaign? No, they knew that. They planned that because the whole point was to sell more books so he can put more money in his pocket. He didn't think he was actually going to win. He still doesn't think he's going to win. He's just going out there and saying, oh man, the more press I get, the more books I get to sign. Presidential campaign, who cares, man? No, yeah, we're going to stop that for a couple weeks. I'm going to make some money, man. Yes! So is this guy eventually going to win the Republican nomination? Hell no, he's not. No way. And I don't know almost any progressive who believes that. But in Ben Carson's mind, the progressives are actually scared to death of him. So much so that they are a threat to his life. He has asked for Secret Service protection. Really? Really? Which tree-hugging liberal, as you would call them, is out there to get you, Ben? Well, let him explain.
How serious have these threats been, and what kind of threats have you gotten, Dr. Carson?
Well, I prefer not to talk about security issues, but I have recognized, and people have been telling me for many, many months, that I'm in great danger because, I challenge the secular progressive movement to the very core. And, they see me as an existential threat. I know that. So, but I also believe in the good Lord, and, we take reasonable precautions.
An existential threat. Ooh, Ben Carson's going to come to get us. He thinks so highly of himself, as all these Republicans do. Obviously I'm threatened by I threaten their very existence because I'm so strong and mighty. Now, by the way, if anybody came up to him with a gun, we know what Ben Carson would do because he told us, like what he did at Popeyes. He would just tell him, go shoot someone else, please. Okay. So the Secret Service so far has not taken the threat seriously because they are not serious. I'll tell you who the real threats are against you, Ben Carson. Right-wing idiots who don't like that you're black. Okay, those guys might actually do something to you. But you see, on the left, we believe in peace and nonviolence. So look, you never know. There's crazy people in the world, right? But is there a movement on the left to endanger Ben Carson's? Okay. Very cool. Okay, anyways. That's Carson being goofy. Now let's get to Carson being sick. Now, we have a race to the bottom in the Republican side, so they're trying to outright wing each other. So this is going to get ugly. It has gotten ugly. And now, on the issue of abortion, it's going to go to places previously unimagined. So, you've imagined some of this, and then others are fresh new ground. Amazing. Okay, so I want to let Chuck Todd ask the questions here, and then listen carefully to Dr. Ben Carson's answers on the issue of abortion.
What if somebody has an unwanted pregnancy? Should they have the right to terminate?
No.
Think about this. During slavery, and I know that's one of those words you're not supposed to say, but I'm saying it. During slavery, a lot of the slave owners thought that they had the right to do whatever they wanted to that slave. Anything that they chose to do. And What if the abolitionist had said, I don't believe in slavery. I think it's wrong. But you guys do whatever you want to do. Where would we be?
Definitively. Do you want to see Roe v. Wade overturned?
Ultimately, I would love to see it overturned.
And that means all abortions illegal, or is there an exception that you would have?
I'm a reasonable person, and if people can come up with a reasonable explanation of why they would like to kill a baby, I'll listen.
Life and health of the mother?
Again, that's an extraordinarily rare situation. But if in that very rare situation it occurred, I believe there's room to discuss that.
Rape and incest?
Rape and incest, I would not be in favor of killing a baby because the baby came about in that way. And all you have to do is go and look up the many stories of people who have led very useful lives who were the result of rape or incest.
Okay, so this is where we are. So, obviously, against abortion would overturn Roe versus Wade. We know. Has compared abortion to slavery many times in the past. So at this point, as outrageous a statement as that is, we're not that surprised. In fact, he compared Obamacare to slavery. So this is soft pedaling it from Ben Carson. Okay. Rape and incest. Well, if you got raped, hey man, I'm not going to hold that against the clump of cells in your body, and I'm going to let that grow and grow. Oh yeah, you have to carry the rapist child for 9 months. And then afterwards, am I going to help you? No. I'm going to strip away as much government assistance to you as possible. In fact, if you can't take care of that kid, I'm going to start calling you a bum and call you a welfare queen, call you all these names, and tell you to grab some bootstraps and good luck with that rapist child that I made you carry. So, am I getting between you and your doctor? Of course I am. Am I in favor of big government? I'm in favor of giant government. I'm going to get inside your uterus and tell you exactly what to do. Okay? So, you get raped, sad day for you. Okay? You're having that rapist child. You don't have a choice. It's a family member that raped you. It's incest. Who cares? You're having your dad's kid, your uncle's kid, whoever it is. I don't care. All I care is about my own ideology. I'm going to make you carry that to term for 9 months. And then take care of it for the rest of your life. Oh, maybe it looks like you're rapist. The baby does. It's not my problem, man. The minute it's born, I don't care at all. In fact, I'm going to try to do everything I can to make sure I do not provide for that baby. I'm going to say that's all your problem, okay? I'm here to be big government and impose these laws upon you and your body and your whole life, and then say, hey, that's your issue, not my issue. But that's not the worst of it. If you heard there in the middle, they said, how about the life of the mother? She said, well, I'm a reasonable person. I'd like to have a reasonable explanation of why they would like to kill a baby. It sounds like you're very, very reasonable, okay? And then he went on to say that in the case of the life of the mother, there's room to discuss that. Oh, are you not merciful? So, if you're a woman out there and you get pregnant, whether it's a rapist or not, you just got pregnant, right? But the doctor tells you, we think this will cost you your life. Ben Carson says, well, we're going to sit down and maybe discuss that. I mean, I have the ultimate power. I'm the government. And I could decide, because I'm a very reasonable person, that I don't give a damn about your life. I'm willing to let you die, as long as we can try to save an embryo, a fetus, whatever it is. I don't care. I value that life as much more important than your life. I mean, I'm willing to discuss whether you'll be allowed to remain alive, but there's a good chance you won't. You have to give me a good reason to end that pregnancy. Otherwise, I end your life. There are women out there who are going to vote for this guy. Are you one of them? You're going to elect this guy who says, I'm going to have a death panel. He accused Obama having death panels, which is, of course, completely made up. This guy says, yeah, I'm going to have a death panel where we decide whether you get to live or not if there's complications in your pregnancy. You're a doctor. I don't give a damn about your doctor. What do I care about the medical field? Doctors. What good are they for, right? No, your doctor doesn't get to decide. You don't get to decide. You think this is a free country? This isn't a free country. I decide. I'm the government. That's what Ben Carson said. So never let them tell you that they're against big government. They love big government. They'll get into every part of your life and make you do the things they want you to do. Do I get to be a moral decision maker? No. Do I get to make that decision based on my beliefs, my human reason, or my connection to God in the way that I perceive it? No! Your perception of your beliefs, your faith, your religion, or lack thereof is irrelevant to Ben Carson. He's going to impose his religion on you, and it might cost you your life. Well, that's a sad day for you. But it's not like you weren't warned. He just warned you. He told you, okay? If he's president, you get raped, you're having the rapist kid. You're having it. We're not having a discussion about that. If your life's on the line, I'll discuss it, but probably you'll die in an effort to save the embryo. These are the monsters that are winning on the Republican side. Okay. Now, let's go to police brutality. It's a cheery show today. In New York City, there was some protests against police brutality. That makes sense, as there is tremendous police brutality in New York. See, Eric Garner was killed over selling loose cigarettes. Wow, he wasn't paying taxes on cigarettes he was selling one at a time, so they choked the life out of him. What police brutality? I don't know what you're talking about, right? It's very unfair to the cops to bring up things like that, and of course he's not alone. There's, shooting after shooting from the cops all across the country, and obviously including New York. So they did an event called Rise Up October, and a lot of people went to it. It had been planned for a long time, and one of the guys who went to it was Quentin Tarantino. He's a filmmaker, and it's good to see that he cares about the issues, so he's out there marching with everybody to make sure that we rise up to stop police violence. And again, very sensible. Let me give you some stats on that. At first, I was shocked by this number because I had read it quickly, but there's about, I think, around 891, but let's, because I don't have the paper in front of me, say over 800 police deaths. And I was like, really? Oh my God, the police are in grave danger. No, of course, what they meant is over 800 people killed by cops so far this year. Okay? In a decade, a little over 50 cops killed in a line of fire. Okay? So the number of people they're killing is way, way above the number of cops that are killed. Now, I don't want any cops killed. There was a cop killed in New York last week. It's a tragedy. They're a human being, and we care about them, right? So we're the left. We actually care about all human beings. So those things, unfortunately, should not be connected. And of course, I understand that the cops are going to wind up shooting some people because sometimes they're in a gunfight with them. It's not like we don't understand that. Of course we understand that. What we're complaining about is, hey, when you're not in a gunfight and they're unarmed, which happens time and time again, we've covered on the show time and time again, and the statistics back that up, can you please not shoot them if they're not armed and they're not a real danger to you? They shot a guy who was totally naked, clearly had no gun, no weapon whatsoever. Who cares? I gotta chase this naked guy. Boom, shoot him, kill him, dead. Tamir Rice, 12-year-old kid. Within 2 seconds, boom, shoot him dead. Move on with our lives. Who's going to bother taking a risk to find out if it's a toy gun or not? The guy in Walmart, a toy gun. I'm not going to bother to check. I shoot. I come in shooting. And then black guy, dangerous. I don't know. Here we go. Let's shoot him up. See what happens. That's the attitude we care about. There's not a single liberal in the country, not a single black activist in the country who says, hey, cops are in a shootout. The guy started shooting at them. Hey, don't shoot back. There's no one who says that. No one. That's made up. Okay? There's no one who's in favor of cops getting killed because we don't want any human beings killed. We're on that side. Whereas the other side says, well, some guys being killed is awesome. But not our guys. But not our guys. Your guys. The community gets killed. Who cares? Cops get killed. What are you doing? Okay, we're fair. We say we don't want cops killed. We don't want citizens killed. Wow, what an outrageous position for Quentin Tarantino to have. So he spoke at the event.
Tamir Rice. A 12-year-old black male child, Cleveland, Ohio. On November 22nd, 2014, Tamir was playing with a toy gun in the park. After a 911 call, when the person calling said the gun was probably a fake and the person holding it was probably a juvenile, the police rushed onto the scene and shot Tamir within 2 seconds. Then they knocked down and handcuffed his sister and locked her in the police car. and they would not allow his mother to hold her lifeless child who lied dead in the street. After almost a year, there's been no charges filed and not even a grand jury selected.
Now that's all true, so that's why, of course, that makes cops even angrier. How dare you say things that are correct? Bow your head! So Patrick J. Lynch, who's the president of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, is furious with Quentin Tarantino. At different times, Tarantino also referred to the cops who shot these people with no justification as murderers. Now remember, in South Carolina, for example, the cop is charged with murder because he shot the guy running away in the back many times and then planted evidence. What would you call that? Well, the prosecutor in South Carolina calls it murder. Okay? So that's why he uses that word. Now, Patrick J. Lynch is furious about that and says, the police officers that Quentin Tarantino calls murderers aren't living in one of his depraved big screen fantasies. They're risking and sometimes sacrificing their lives to protect communities from real crime and mayhem. I think, and then the person who was just recently killed, a police officer in New York, they brought their relatives in to also yell at Quentin Tarantino. So Chantal Abrams says, I think it's very disrespectful. Everyone forgets that behind the uniform is a person. But Chantal, nobody forgets that. Okay, that's just not true. There's nobody on the left or in the activist community saying, hey, you know what, cops aren't real people, they're robots, they're stormtroopers, and we should go get them. We should inflict violence on them. And no one who shot a cop is an activist or a protester. No one, okay? The people who shoot cops are usually depraved and oftentimes are maniacs, have mental issues, and they have very easy access to guns. Now, us on the left, we would like to stop that easy access to guns so that you can't shoot cops. In fact, we argue that you should not, the public should not have armor-piercing bullets whose whole job is to get through the cop's armor and kill and murder cops. Because I got news for you, deer don't have armor, right? So we're the ones trying to protect cops' lives as we protect everyone's lives. But these guys turn around, how dare you? How dare you? No, you bow your head and you say the cops are always right. No, okay, I can't help you if you're stupid, okay? But I'll try to talk slower so that you understand better, Patrick Lynch, okay? That's who I'm referring to here. So, you see, just because some cops got killed, which we are 100% against, and actually we're fighting to save your life here on the left, more so than the right wing ever has. They want people to have armor-piercing bullets so they can kill cops. We're against them, okay? Just because we want to save cops' lives does not mean that we have to condone police brutality. We can be against both those things at the same time. You know why? Because we have more than two brain cells that we can rub together. We can say, hey, you know what? I don't want you to abuse the citizens, and I also don't want you to get killed. I want you to be perfectly healthy, and I want you to do your job, which is to protect the community, instead of beating down the community, stopping and frisking them in New York, and overwhelming numbers attacking minorities, and not white people. You live in New York, the greatest robbers this planet has ever seen also live in New York. They're down on Wall Street. They created the greatest robbery in human history in 2008. They're right there. You don't stop and frisk them. What we're asking is that you treat everybody equally. Whoa! Wow! What are we, Americans? So that's what we want. We want you to be able to do your job, go get the bad guys, and be perfectly safe doing it, while not shooting and killing and sometimes murdering the wrong people. If you think that's too much to ask for, then you should immediately resign from your job because you're a danger to the community. Saying, oh man, I gotta do my job without killing innocent people? That's too hard, you're so tough on the cops. Well then you're a loser, and either you resign or you should be fired immediately. Young Turks. from you guys. Use hashtag TYT Live to communicate with us throughout the show. El Duende Chingon says, couldn't get a pic, but this morning I saw a guy with a bumper sticker that read, Trump no vale madre. I need one. Apparently, I'm told that means Trump ain't worth shit. Which is fun. E. Johns writes in, I know one time Trump was definitely told no, the time that he raped his wife back in the 1980s. Well, that's in court documents, so you go look that up. Annette said, Republicans aren't in the realm of politics anymore. It's scary. They're only operating on baser instincts, hate, fear, and greed. That is most certainly true. That's what they've been doing for a long time, but now they've kicked it up to a very, very ugly level. Rob says, unbelievably, I've had huge arguments with supposed critical thinking skeptics who support the cops on almost all of these murders. Now, it's a fascinating thing, man. People go and circle the wagons on some things. I did it on a story we're going to do on the second hour, and I'm going to be honest about it, and I'll tell you what it was about, right? Because it affected me. And I think for a lot of people, they think the cops protect me from all the things that I'm scared of. Remember, conservatives mainly live in a fear-based world. If you want to appeal to a conservative, scare them a little bit. They're like, okay, whatever you want. Oh, it's protect me from the others. The others are so scary, right? So if you say, hey, sometimes the cops do wrong things, they're like, no way, cops protect me. I love the cops, right? And finally, Jessica Justice says, I don't want any cops killed either. My sister's a cop. Hashtag always worried. But I don't want civilians to die either. Isn't that the simplest idea in the world? But why is it so hard for other people to understand? We don't want anyone killed. It's not that hard. Thank you, Jessica. Okay. All right, now let's move forward. Got 2 stories left for you. Okay. Now, this is shocking. This happened in Paris. About 200 Muslim protesters got together to protest AFP. They thought AFP, and if you don't know that, that's like the Associated Press in France, was not giving fair coverage to Muslims. They demanded better coverage, right? Now, who are these guys to demand better coverage? You get the coverage that is based on the news, right? We're not going to change the news to, please you and your ideological beliefs, right? Certainly not going to change it to make your religion look any better. I think we can all agree to that. And then here's a scary moment. David Perrotin was in the crowd. He's a journalist for BuzzFeed. And apparently they didn't like the way he was covering things. You know what they did? First, they threatened him. They said it wasn't good to take photos. They told him to take any photos of them because they don't want. Now they're willing to attack him, but they don't want their picture taken. Okay, interesting. Then one protester said to him, I know who you are. I have information about you. You are David Perrotin. I don't know how that guy found out about who this reporter is, but imagine you're that reporter. You're pretty angry and scared, right? There's these 200 angry Muslim protesters, and one of them says, I know who you are, right? At that point, the reporter starts running towards the cops to get protection. And in fact, BuzzFeed reports then, Perrotin rushed towards the police line in front of the AFP, but was stopped by a group of masked men who proceeded to beat him. My God, okay. I think we can all agree this is absolutely outrageous. And they went on to explain on Mediaite, the journalist managed to make it to the line, but not before also being hit by police officers who didn't realize that he was a reporter. Perrotin was escorted to safety 45 minutes later. Oh my God, can you imagine? And this is what they're talking about. Europe is being taken over by Muslims, and now the cops are even helping them beat innocent reporters like this because they didn't like the coverage of their religion or their particular ideology. Oh, right. These were not Muslim protesters. They were Jewish protesters. This was the Jewish Defense League, and there was 200 protesters from them, and they did not like that Perrotin or the AFP, a different organization, was giving what they viewed to be pro-Palestinian coverage. And that is not to be tolerated. So if you see a reporter giving an honest coverage of the news, well, you call that pro-Palestinian and you beat him with masked men. Now, I know that if you were outraged when you thought it was Muslims, you're equally outraged when it's the Jewish Defense League, right? That's why it's been all over the news. I mean, that's why CNN is covering this nonstop. Fox News is covering it nonstop. Oh, they're not covering it at all. Well, that's interesting. I know when Muslims do any kind of attack, that is wall-to-wall coverage. Jewish Defense League does it. Okay, now I am opposed to all fundamentalists. So I despise it when Muslims do it, and I despise it when anyone else does it, including this so-called Jewish Defense League that does not speak for all other Jews. You see, here, among progressives, we're reasonably intelligent, and we understand that when some Muslims do attacks, they don't represent all Muslims. And when some Jews attack a reporter in the Jewish Defense League, they most certainly don't represent all Jews. Now, you would never say that the Jewish Defense League that attacked that guy as a reporter, they did it with masks on, they did it to intimidate him. You wouldn't say that they represent all Jews, and we got to watch out for the Jews. Maybe we should profile them. You wouldn't say, I hope to God you wouldn't say that, right? I certainly wouldn't say that because I'm a progressive. But when it comes to Muslims, can't we just profile them all? Don't a couple of bad guys represent the entire 1.6 billion people of religion? It's preposterous when you say it about Jews or Christians or Muslims. Now, the JDL and similar organizations have been, quote, involved in attacks on pro-Palestinian media commentators and politicians. And in the case of Perotin, the guy who said, I know who you are, and gave his name said, wait, I'll tell the JDL that you're here. And then he got set upon. Okay? So I don't know much about the Jewish Defense League outside of this story, so I don't want to make assumptions about the whole group. But now let's do what the right wing always does, which is, have the leaders apologize for the actions of these masked men who clearly, at least in this protest, were from the Jewish Defense League? No. They, of course, said that they deny any responsibility, and they went on to insult Perotin again, calling him a pseudo-journalist. Well, if you weren't the one attacking him, why are you calling him a pseudo-journalist and now trying to add insult to injury? Perhaps you were the ones who were attacking him, and your leaders are doing absolutely nothing about it. Now, if we were right-wing, we would then say all Jews need to denounce the Jewish Defense League, otherwise they're all guilty. But we're not right-wing because we're smart, okay? We know that that's a preposterous thing to say. That no one has any responsibility for this attack other than the people who actually did the attack and ordered the attack, okay? It doesn't say anything about any race or religion outside of that. Can we please have the same rules for everybody? Is that too much to ask for? And can you please stop beating up reporters who you don't agree with? Is that too much to ask for? I think neither one of those things should be very hard to understand or abide by, but apparently some do not. Okay. Now, finally, the story I promised you that actually it's also sad, but no, it doesn't really have a happy ending, but it is a little heartwarming, so let me tell you about it. Okay. Now, you remember back in 1968, there was that powerful moment in the Olympics when Tommy Smith and John Carlos won gold and bronze in the 200-meter race in Mexico City. And they put on black gloves and raised their hands in protest for what was happening in the country. In that year, of course, Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, and they wanted to speak out for all the people who were beaten down. They wanted to speak out for equality, and they also wanted to speak out for all those who lived in poverty. They actually did not have their shoes on. You can't see it in that picture, but that's why they took their shoes off in protest of that as well. And there were some badges there, but what you might not have noticed is the person no one ever noticed in that picture, Peter Norman. Peter Norman's an Australian, and he came in second that year in the Olympics. A huge upset. They didn't think he was going to finish in the top three at all, and he ran an amazing race. In fact, he was so fast that day that his record in the 200 meters still stands as the Australian record to this day. He ran it back in 1968. Isn't that amazing? So what did Norman do? I mean, he didn't really do anything. He didn't, have the black glove on. He didn't seem to support them, right? Wrong. So this is the fascinating story of Peter Norman. It turns out he's the one that gave them the gloves in the first place. And they said, well, we only have one pair. He's like, why don't both of you wear them, just wear one apiece. Okay, so they're like, well, do you want to participate in this? He's like, absolutely, what can I do? Well, there was this patch that they used to have back then called the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And what that stood for is being on the side for equality no matter where you are. And he wore that badge. He didn't have that badge, but an Olympic rower from the U.S. team, when he found out that a white Australian was going to participate in this protest, he couldn't believe it. And he's like, that's fantastic. Now, why couldn't he believe it? And he gave him, the American rower gave Norman the badge to wear that night, and he did wear it along with Carlos and Smith. Why is it so amazing? Well, you might not know this or remember it, but back then Australia had apartheid, like South Africa did. And in a lot of ways, that apartheid was quite vicious. It had heavy restrictions on non-white immigration, discriminatory laws against Aboriginal people in Australia, and even forced adoptions of native children to white families. And basically, by wearing that badge and being on that podium, they thought that he was collaborating with Carlos and Smith. And Carlos and Smith describe it this way. When they talked to Norman about it, Carlos said, I expected to see fear in Norman's eyes, but instead we saw love. Now, in Australia, there were consequences. 4 years later, at the 1972 Summer Olympics that took place in Munich, Germany, Norman wasn't part of the Australian sprinters team, despite having run qualifying times for the 200 meters 13 times and the 100 meters 5 times. So, just to be clear on that, he made it onto the team, fair and square, 13 different times for the 200 and 5 times for the 100. They said, yeah, that's true, but you stood with those black guys, so you're not allowed on the team. Films for Action continues. Back in the change-resisting, whitewashed Australia, he was treated like an outsider, his family outcasted, and work impossible to find. For a time, he worked as a gym teacher, continuing to struggle against inequalities as a trade unionist, and occasionally working in a butcher shop. John Carlos continued to say, if we were getting beat up, and they were, there was a lot of consequences for Carlos and Smith when they came back. They were thrown out of our Olympic committee and our teams. They were stripped of their medals. But Carlos says, if we were getting beat up, Peter was facing an entire country and suffering alone. Now, even as we celebrate Carlos and Smith here in this country, for example, San Jose University has a statue of that moment. And let's take a look at that statue for a second. And this is not unusual. I don't mean to pick on them. But Norman's completely left out of the statue. He's not even there. Nobody ever talks about him, right? Well, turns out that Norman could have saved himself. And here's a further explanation of that. Remember, his life is ruined. They won't let him go back into the Olympics. They won't let him do anything related to the Olympics. Has to work in a butcher shop. There's one way out. For years, Norman had only one chance to save himself. He was invited to condemn his co-athletes, John Carlos and Tommy Smith's gesture, in exchange for a pardon from the system that ostracized him. A pardon that would have allowed him to find a stable job with the Australian Olympic Committee and be part of the organization of the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Norman never gave in and never condemned the choice of the two Americans. That's the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Even though he was one of their literally greatest athletes in Australian history, they did not let him march, let alone giving him a job. They didn't let him march in the 2000 Sydney Olympics under the banner of Australia. That was well after apartheid's gone. All that old system is beaten down. They're past it, but they still held a grudge. How dare you not denounce those two black guys? In 2006, Norman died. Unfortunately, no better off financially in his life. And when he was being buried, his two old friends, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, went to his funeral and carried his casket. Finally, in the year 2012, the Australian Parliament passed a law saying apologies to Peter Norman for the wrong done by Australia in failing to send him to the 1972 Munich Olympics, despite repeatedly qualifying, and belatedly recognized the powerful role that Peter Norman played in furthering racial equality. Look, what everybody did there was brave, heroic, And we know about John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and they are rightfully celebrated now. But let's not forget Peter Norman, who was one of the quiet heroes. And that happens in all of these movements. They are the guys we celebrate and the guys we know for very, very, very good reasons. But they are the quiet heroes who sometimes suffer alone, and in some ways, just as heroic, at least, because they're not celebrated. He was never celebrated in his life, and he died being ostracized from his own country. And he took all that on for one simple reason, because he wanted to do the right thing. And when they asked him, hey, are you mad at Carlos and Smith for taking away your moment? You broke this record for your own country. You ran an amazing race, and all the news was about them. And he answered, I couldn't have been prouder to be part of that moment. Unfortunately, he took that to his grave. There are great heroes in the world, some we know about, and some we don't. Thank you, Peter. Young Turks.
Change anything.
Alright, back on the Young Turks. Something else that, I'm not just reporting the news today, but, Casper over here making a little bit of news for herself, huh?
Hi.
Hey, so she goes away for a week, comes back as, Mrs. Lopez.
I'm not Mrs. Lopez. But I did get engaged over the weekend.
Oh, no!
It's exciting, but also I feel so adult.
Oh, I know. Ooh,
Yeah.
being an adult.
Yeah.
Kind of sucks,
Yeah.
right?
Nothing solidifies it more than an engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. That's the penultimate moment in adulthood. The ultimate moment is when you have a kid,
Yeah, that's true.
and then you're really fun.
Yeah. Then you're really an
Just
adult.
kidding, just kidding. Spend a lovely weekend with my kids. Okay, now, in the post-game for the members, Anna will describe the schmoopy romantic moment when Clopey popped the question. So, for all you members out there, and if you're not a member, tytnetwork.com/subscribe. tytnetwork.com/subscribe, and it will tell the whole schmoopy story in the
Yes.
post-game today.
Yes, I will.
Okay?
But in the meantime, we have lots of news.
We do. Let me read some tweets real quick. I Know Nothing wrote in about the JDL story. Damn it! And I had my Muslim apologies tweets all ready to go. Okay. Big Doc said about Peter Norman, the Australian. What a true American hero. Well, kind of. He's a hero in America in some ways, but of course he's Australian, and he should have been an Australian hero. Unfortunately, they denied that to him for his whole life. Brian Newton says, I remember that controversy with the 2000 Olympic Games. Fuck. And he said, we will never forget who our real friends are in the struggle for equality. And finally, Alyssa Zuniga says, TYT making me cry before class. Thanks, guys. It's very sweet of you to say. I guess, yeah, that's kind of a weird thing to thank you for making. Anyway, members of the day are Cristobal Solis the third, it's member number 1853, and member number 2427 is Wendy Kearns. Cristobal, Wendy, you guys will get to hear Anna's story on her engagement in Disney World.
No.
Oh, twisty twist.
There's
I thought
a
it was
little twist in that story.
Okay, I thought it was a Disney World. All right. Yeah. Let's get started. We got a lot of stories. What do you got for us, Anna?
All right. Ben Carson made news after he beat Donald Trump in the Iowa polls, and Donald Trump wasn't too happy about it. In fact, he spoke out against it and said that, you know what, maybe this isn't that big of a deal because Ben Carson has low energy. Take a look.
Carson is super low. I don't understand the whole deal. I don't know what's going on. Carson is lower energy than Bush. I don't understand what's going on because we're going to talk about the fact that for the first time in 100 days, I had a poll that said I'm in second place in Iowa. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. Only in Iowa. The rest were killing. But for some reason, I had a bad week in Iowa, which I don't believe. The headlines today all over Fox and CNN and everything. Trump losing in polls to Carson. Carson. I don't think Carson's going to negotiate really well with China, folks, in all fairness. Okay? I don't think so. And I like him. I don't think so.
I love everything about that video. I love his goofy hat, Make America Great Again. I love the fact that his hat almost perfectly matches his skin color.
Yeah, he's literally red in the face. Like, Carson! Carson! He's low energy! I'm like, dude, I got that you're high energy. That message was very loud and clear.
He is the antithesis of Carson in some ways, but also very similar in other ways, right? So, of course, this is par for the course when it comes to Donald Trump. Not surprised by his reaction, very entertained by his reaction, in fact. And Ben Carson wanted to defend himself while he went on Meet the Press. So he was kind of asked about his, low energy and whether or not he agrees with it, and here's what he had to say.
I am soft-spoken. I do have a tendency to be relaxed. I wasn't always like that. There was a time when I was, very volatile. But I changed.
When was that?
As a teenager. I would go after people with rocks and bricks and baseball bats and hammers. And, of course, many people know the story when I was 14 and I tried to stab someone. And, fortunately, my life has been changed. I'm a very different person now.
That is enormously strange. First of all, almost no one knew that you tried to stab someone. So I don't know where you're going with that. Everybody knew that. Second of all, that story actually made me really dislike Ben Carson. And I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, do I hate him for what he did as a 14-year-old? No, of course not. I mean, he grew up in a totally different circumstance. I don't know what that was about. I don't know if it was self-defense. I'm not going to get into judging 14-year-old Ben Carson. But what I hate about it is it further validates all the stereotypes for white Republicans in their heads. And that's why they love this guy. You see that even the famous brain surgeon, when he was younger, was violent. Stones and stabbings and all that. You know how they are, right? And then he said later in that story, but then he went home and he prayed about it. And that Jesus helped him to see the light. So, for white Republicans, this is manna from heaven. We took this savage, and Jesus saved him and made him a neurosurgeon. And now he comes out here and tells us everything we want to hear. It's all black culture's fault. It's all the black people's fault. And if they would just listen to the cops and authority figures and bow their heads, I mean, we're not going to give them any money or any help or any assistance. But if they would accept that fate, then everything would be great. Oh, Ben Carson, exactly our kind of black guy.
That's actually a perspective I never even thought about, but you're right. I mean, it does play into the stereotypes that they push constantly, and so I wouldn't be surprised if people did point to that interview and say, see. But I do also know that entire interview that he did really played to evangelicals in Iowa, because not only did he talk about how he changed because he prayed, right? But he also talked about the abortion thing where he's like, no exceptions when it comes to abortions. Maybe if the woman's life is in danger, but rape and incest, don't give a shit. You got to have the baby, right? Yep. So evangelicals love that. And there are a lot of evangelicals in Iowa, and I know that he's trying to kind of play to them.
And by the way, I'm sorry, can I just say that he said when it comes to the life of the mother, he said there's room to discuss that.
That's exactly what he said, yeah. So he doesn't even think that it's a clear-cut case if the woman's life is in danger. And by the way, he also kind of emphasized that, that's like extremely rare. Well, we didn't ask you how rare it is. We asked you what you would do in that circumstance.
Yeah, and by the way, as always, they make up how rare it is. They make up numbers about how rare it is. It's actually not true what they say. So not surprising at all there. Now, in terms of how it's going to play out in politics, you're right, Anna. The evangelicals are going to eat that up. Oh, the savage found Jesus, and and then he became a good guy and really smart. They're eating that up. They love it. And then, he hates women and won't even save their lives, even if they were raped. as long as we can protect fetus, keep women down. I mean, protect the fetus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love it. I love it. They kind of like that he's soft-spoken. Trump seems brash. And Trump is obviously not as religious as Ben Carson. Now he claims otherwise. Of course, Trump then went out and said, "Hey, I'm Presbyterian. That's right down the middle." This is the exact quote. I'm right. That's right down the middle, right? He's like, he's Seventh-day Adventist. What's that about? It's unbelievable. Of course, the usual Trump move. But Trump attacking Carson doesn't play as well as Trump attacking Bush, because Bush is establishment.
Yeah.
So the Republican voters hate the establishment now, but they don't hate Ben Carson. They like Ben Carson for all the reasons that we just stated here.
Mm-hmm.
So Trump ought to be careful in how he attacks him.
So I know that a lot of people are excited, not excited, but they're amazed at the fact that Ben Carson beat Trump in the polls in Iowa, right?
Yeah.
But
and it's just polling, by the way.
It's just polling. It doesn't mean that he won, the primary in Iowa or the caucus, right? But didn't not Mitt Romney, I'm sorry, Santorum. Didn't Santorum win the caucus in Iowa? It doesn't mean much.
No, the Iowa caucus, the only time it's ever really mattered is when Obama beat Hillary Clinton and shocked the world. And people were like, whoa, what happened there? They didn't see that coming. But on the right-wing side, on the Republican side, always, not always, but almost always, the right-wing super Christian zealot does much better and oftentimes wins the Iowa caucus, and then goes out to Schwang Wang Wang in the rest of the state.
Yeah.
So don't get all hyped up about Ben Carson's going to win nationwide. He's not. And part of the reason is because Trump is ironically kind of right about the low energy thing. I mean, at the end of the day, and you're like, who is it? This guy's going to be commander-in-chief? This guy's going to lead the nation?
I got to be honest with you. That interview where he talked about his inner demons and how he supposedly got past them, that actually scared me more, because the people who are constantly cool, calm, collected, and they seem like they're low energy, and then you find out they had this like crazy violent past, you don't know when that's going to bubble up again. Maybe that's an unfair accusation, but always fear the quiet ones. Okay.
Well, then there's a lot to fear about Ben Carson. The state of our union is kind of okay.
And I'm not talking about introverts. I'm talking specifically about people who make very strong statements, like constantly talking about slavery, comparing things to slavery, constantly talking about Nazis, and then they do so in a very calm, relaxed voice. It's like they're saying the most extreme things you can imagine, but they're saying it calmly, so you think that it's totally fine and reasonable.
Yes.
Just fear those guys. I don't know.
Okay, so Ben Carson, the whole thing, cut it out. Okay. What was that? How was he going to cut it out? I don't know. But there's no winners here is what I meant to say. There's no winners, right? Trump's an asshole. Carson's an asshole. But you're right, Anna. That interview made me dislike Carson 1,000 times more. Before I was like, novelty, like annoying guy who's there for a specific purpose, right?
Yeah.
But now I actually think he's a dick. Yeah, how's that for? All right, let's move forward.
All right, we move on to a pretty devastating story. A high school student in Chicago has died from a head injury that he suffered from playing football. This is the 7th high school student who has died from playing football in the country this year alone. His name was Andre Smith, and he went to Bogan High School. Now, hundreds of students attended his, remembrance. People were mourning him. Smith was playing for Bogan High School Thursday when a hit on the last play of the game left him disoriented. He collapsed after walking off the field and later died at Christ Hospital. The medical examiner Saturday ruled the death was accidental, caused by blunt force head injuries due to football. As you guys know, this is very common. This has been a very hot button issue when it comes to football, when it comes to the National League, and when it comes to college and high school football. And I don't know whether or not there's a real solution to this, but I do know that it's a dangerous game, and we're now learning more and more about what these injuries can do to people.
So we covered this extensively on Friday's show, and one of the amazing facts that came out of it is that high school students are 3 times more likely to get injured in this way and to pass away than college or NFL players. And part of the reason for that is that their brain is still in development. Part of the reason for that is because the equipment is not as good. At the NFL level, obviously, the equipment is excellent. For high school level, a lot of the equipment is passed down through a lot of years, and it's very shoddy. So this is a tragedy any way you slice it. But it further, backs up what I along. And I should correct myself. Not all along. My whole life I was in favor of my kid playing football as I did, right? But recently, about a year or two ago, I said, no, I can't do it. I won't let my son play football. And so, look, you can say, hey, there's more non-football related injuries that lead to deaths. For example, heat stroke, heart attacks, etc. on the football field cause more deaths than direct football related injuries. And hey, that could happen in track and that could happen in other places. But there's very easy precautions we can take, because in 2003, the NCAA's, for example, put in protections in the case of heat, and we used to have 2 people a month die from heat stroke on the football field before the precautions. Every month, every year that they played football, two players would die every month, right? After the precautions were taken, only 1 player has died from heat stroke in 12 years, okay? So there is something you can do about the non-football related injuries. But the football related injuries, the head trauma, well, we're making better equipment, and that has cut down on the deaths. In the 1965 to 1974, we had 150 people die from direct football injuries per year. Now it's down to 7. Okay, not 150 per year, 150 in that 10-year period. So we have definitely made advancements, okay? But when you see a story of what happened to this kid, you feel like, well, apparently not enough.
And also, people just don't expect it to happen, right? Like, we're aware of it because we talk about it on the show, we look at the statistics, we look at the data, but it wasn't until fairly recently that this became part of a broader discussion in the country, right? And so everyone was shocked at what happened to this kid, right? No one expects it. He's just playing a game. Once he gets hit in the head, they think, oh, he's fine, he's walking around, he seems totally okay. But there was a really great point made on CNN today about how a lot of high schools don't have full-time athletic trainers. And oftentimes when there's an athletic trainer there, they can immediately determine whether or not that hit to the head is dangerous, and that person should be rushed to the hospital immediately. And since athletic trainers usually are not there full-time at high school games, well, you have less experts there to ensure the safety of these players.
Only 37% of high schools have athletic trainers. So that's another reason why it's more dangerous to play in high school. So, I thought naively before I read all the stories about the deaths coming out of football in high school that high school might be a little safer because the hits are not as ferocious as they are in college and football. But apparently that's not the case. So then it makes me not want to have my kid play football even more, which is a shame because I love the sport. I love it. But you can say, hey, in cross country, they could also get heat stroke. But yes, like I said, there are things you can do to prevent that. In cross country track, for example, though, they don't run into each other's heads at maximum impact.
Right.
Right. So this is clearly more dangerous than some of the other sports.
All right, moving on to something different. FBI Director James Comey complains about the fact that people are holding police officials accountable for their alleged police brutality, and as a result, that's leading to more crime in America. In fact, he talked about how police officials throughout the country are refusing to do policing as aggressively as before because of the fact that they're worried that someone will film them, put it up on YouTube, and then they're going to face criticism. Here is an exact statement from James Comey. He says, in today's YouTube world, there are officers reluctant to get out of their cars and do the work that controls violent crime. Our officers are answering 911 calls but avoiding the informal contact that keeps bad guys from standing around, especially with guns. Now, he made these statements while he was in Chicago, and there's been a huge increase of crime in areas like Chicago, and he's basically blaming it on the so-called Ferguson effect or the YouTube effect. Oh, these cops are so worried about being called out that now they're just not as aggressive in their policing.
Okay, so I actually love this, and I'll tell you why. Because apparently we got their attention. So the people showing that on YouTube, well, we're among them. Right, and there's obviously a lot of the videos that go up on YouTube on their own channels, different channels, and they're apparently scared of us. Great. Why? Because we don't want them to beat up people they're not supposed to beat up. We don't want them to shoot unarmed people. We don't want them to do it and get away with it. So if that bothers them, oh, cry me a river. Oh my God, we used to be able to kick the living crap out of people or shoot unarmed people and totally get away with it. Now you're pointing your cameras at us and your cell phones at us and and putting up on YouTube, yeah, we caught your police brutality. Get used to it. Now, and time again, what do they do, Anna? They say, oh, yeah, well, then we're not going to do our job. If we can't do our job shitty, if we can't do it without violating your rights and beating you up for no reason, then we don't want to do it at all.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? So you go to an accountant and you're like, hey, can you do the taxes with correct math? Oh, now you're going to make me do correct math. Well, I'm not going to do your taxes if I can do the math right? That would be outrageous, right? So why do cops get to say it? Oh, we're sitting on our hands in our police cars because we won't come out. Now, and then look at the example he gave. He said going in, confronting gangs in street corners. Later he said at 1 a.m. to see if they're armed or not. Now, when has there been a YouTube video of cops catching gangs at 1 a.m. with guns? And people have complained about it.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue I've had with his statements is the way that he describes them, right? The way he illustrates these videos. These videos, like Tamir Rice, right? Just one example, okay? That's not a video of police officials approaching shady-looking guys at 1 a.m. It's a police video, or it's a surveillance video of a cop showing up to the scene and shooting a kid within 2 seconds because he thinks that the kid might be armed, right? Didn't ask any questions. Those are clear cases where individuals who are getting paid with our taxpayer money should be held accountable for their actions. And Jake, I think what they're doing here is actually a strategy to get exactly what they want. Here's what cops want. They want us to stop filming them. They've been wanting us to stop filming them for years now, even before these police brutality stories started dominating the headlines, right? And so what they're going to do is they're going to point to all of this increase in violence, and they're going to say, see, you guys are deterring us from doing our jobs. So if you want us to do our jobs, get off our asses, stop filming us. And I guarantee you that there will be some politicians that listen to them and some citizens that don't actually delve into this issue deep enough to understand what's going on who will support exactly what the cops want here. They are paid with our money. They are public servants, okay? They are not supposed to use excessive force and treat us as though we live in a military state, okay? They are supposed to do their jobs, and if they're refusing to do so, they should be reprimanded for that. But that's not what's happening here. James Comey is backing them for their refusal to do their jobs, and it's driving me insane.
So James Comey, by the way, classic Obama administration appointment, right-winger from the Bush administration. Now, he took some principled stands during the Bush administration, and I've given him credit for that. But what did Obama do? Of course, he found the most right-wing guy he could, principled or otherwise, and he made him the head of the FBI. So now, as the head of the FBI, what does he do? He goes, bow your head. The cops are always right. How dare you question them? Okay, so let me give you more James Comey quotes. He says, what may appear on YouTube to be police officers harassing people on the street is actually genuine crime deterrence.
Get out of here.
But
wow.
No one complained about that. No one saw a video on YouTube of cops going up to a gang, finding weapons on them. We're like, how dare you harass that gang, right? Or harass people that turned out to be gang members. No, we complained when it turns out they were innocent people, and you just assumed they were gang members because they were black. Or you assumed that they were dangerous, even though he was a 12-year-old kid, Tamir Rice, and you shot him dead in 2 seconds. Or the guy in South Carolina where you shot him in the back. Yeah, that was a problem. That's what we're complaining about.
No, Jake, that was just a video of cops harassing people because they're doing their jobs, right? No one died in those videos, did they? Like the Eric Garner case. That video wasn't simply police officials harassing someone. It was a video of police officials harassing someone to the point where he was placed in a chokehold and killed over untaxed cigarettes, okay? So he's completely belittling or minimizing what those videos were about, which is a disservice to all the students that he was speaking to during this speech and all the people who are shallow enough to believe what this guy is saying. Because what he's doing right now is covering up for all the police brutality that's getting attention in the country right now. And I really hope that the strategy by the cops doesn't work.
Yeah, Comey goes on to say that people in the community are making the cops feel under siege. No, the people in the community are complaining that the cops have them under siege when they're supposed to be serving the community. I know cops laugh at that idea, serving the community. We're not here to serve you. We're here to, put a baton upside your head and tell you who's the boss, right? Well, turns out the community doesn't like that. The community pays their taxes, okay? So, one more thing. He said, I've been told by a senior police leader who urges force to remember that their political leadership has no tolerance for a viral video. Meaning like, they made this political. Well, what kind of system do we live in? We live in a democracy, right? So it's political because the people that elect officials say, hey, I don't want to get my ass kicked anymore. I don't want my son shot within 2 seconds. I don't want the police brutality. Oh, now you're making it political. Okay. Yes, we want the community wants you to stop beating us and killing us. That's not too much to ask for. So stop crying over like, oh no, they made us do our jobs without killing people. Killing unarmed people, innocent people. You go arrest gang members, there's not a single complaint about that. So stop making shit up.
It's interesting that the people in this country that get away with not doing their jobs are usually the ones that get paid with our taxpayer money. Members of Congress, these police officials, they continuously get defended for not doing what they're supposed to do, and it's maddening.
He says, we need to be careful. This is graphic 7B. This is implicit threat. We need to be careful it doesn't drift away from us in the age of viral videos, or there will be profound consequences.
That's going to resonate with some citizens. They're going to look at these crime statistics and they're going to say, oh my God, we got to give the cops what they want because if we don't, we're going to be unsafe. No, you're already unsafe. Okay? You're already unsafe. If you make the mistake of moving in the wrong direction during a traffic stop, you could get shot. Okay? We're already living in a scary situation.
Okay. There's been 891 police killings as of October 9th. Not cops getting killed. No, police doing the killing. Okay? So we're not even done with the year. Not anywhere done with the year. 891 times the cops shot and killed people. Of those 891, there's no outrage on the internet about anyone who had actually fired at the cops or put the cops' lives in danger. There's outrage when they were unarmed, when they were kids, when they had toy guns, they had no guns, they had nothing on them, and you shot and killed them anyway, and sometimes in the back. All right? And almost every time, without asking any questions, they're trying to ascertain who they are. You know, the policing you're supposed to do, right? So, spare me. Spare me with your, oh, no, don't make me do my job.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, another reason why you should never fly United.
Alright, we're back on the Young Turks. Mr. Red Penguin writes in, protesters who didn't kill anybody are attacked and arrested, but the actual cops who did the killing are protected. It's a good point as to how it's the opposite of the result it should be. Okay, we had asked Friday, before this new kid died from the football injuries about football. Would you ban high school football? On our app, and just go to the App Store and get the TYT app. 24% said yes, they'd ban high school football. 76% said no, they wouldn't. Then we asked, would you let your kid play high school football? And 50% said yes, and 50% said no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So actually 6 more votes in favor of no than yes. So interesting state of affairs in this country at this point. All right, let's go forward.
A man with cerebral palsy was left to crawl out of a United Airlines flight because they did not get him a special wheelchair in time to get him off the flight. DRC Neal was the person who needed to get off the flight immediately because he needed to use the restroom. Now, apparently, because of his disability, he's unable to use the restroom in the airport, in the flight. So he had to wait until they landed, and of course he had to use the restroom because it was a long flight. And when he asked, hey, what's up, where's the wheelchair, I need to get off, apparently they had told him, oh, it's going to take 15 to 20 minutes. According to the Ross story, he was informed that it would take another 15 to 20 minutes for the device to be brought back. Apparently they had said that they didn't need the device, and they took it away, and then they're like, oh, crap, we made a mistake, we need it back. On top of the 20 minutes, he had already waited while all of the other passengers disembarked. Okay, we all know that takes a very long time. Neal was reduced to crawling half the length of the plane down the aisle and to the doorway where his regular wheelchair waited. Now, this is apparently a very common issue when it comes to flying. A lot of disabled people have to deal with a lot of obstacles in order to get around and to travel. Last year, more than 27,500 disability-related complaints were filed with the Department of Transportation.
Yeah. Look, we just need to treat each other with a little bit more decency. And I get it, you've got bureaucracy, and it's not like they told the guy, hey, we're never going to get you the wheelchair. And that did happen in another story we covered recently, where the woman was disabled and had to crawl out of the plane. But at the same time, understand that the guy hasn't been able to go to the restroom for a long time. He's obviously in a tough spot. Can someone step up and go, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not my job, but I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that we get that wheelchair back for you as soon as possible, right? Don't just pass it off and be like, hey, man, hey, that's procedure, man.
15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, you're going to have to wait another 15 to 20 minutes, and that's the way it is. Can we care about each other? Is it? I always feel like, is it too much to ask for? And oftentimes the answer is apparently yes.
Yeah, so it's already bad enough when it comes to normal, everyday situations, but it's amplified whenever it comes to flying. Because with flying, I don't know if it's because more and more airlines are buying one another out and there's more and more monopolies when it comes to traveling from certain destinations. But it's incredible how little they care about customer service, how little they care about making sure that people are comfortable. Think about how expensive it is to fly. And I know that a lot of people make the argument that, hey, with gas prices, a lot of airlines are actually losing money. But no, they're still turning a profit, right? And it doesn't matter how much money you spend on that ticket. They still treat you like you're a sardine. They still treat you like you're a nameless, faceless person who depends on them, who has no other choice but to rely on them. And I hate that. I hate feeling like customer service isn't important to them.
So, of course, it's not the case in all instances, and I just had a flight attendant, Andre, at Virgin America, who watched the show, is a great guy, was super, super helpful, and that's, for me, it's actually, more often than not, the flight attendants are terrific, and not because they recognize me, Andre happened to, but they, most of the time, are very friendly. But in the instances you get flight attendants who are not, it does really get maddening. There's some that feel like, and I know they say, and we got people writing in and telling us, you don't know what a pain in the ass the customers. Okay, well, I actually don't doubt that. I'm sure there are a lot of people on the flights who get cranky and who are not predisposed to being nice in the first place, and you got to deal with that stuff. But that is part of your job, and we can't have you striking back. And we certainly can't have it in the case of disabled people. Like, if anything, you got to go more out of your way to make sure they're all right. In this case, it turns out, last piece of irony, he's a disability rights activist, and he had gone to San Francisco to give a speech on accessible transit, and then this happened to him.
Yeah. No, United did everything they could to make things right later. They apologized. They gave him $300, a $300 refund, and he said that this had actually happened to him before, and other airlines didn't even want to make things right with him, right? They didn't want to communicate with him. They didn't care. So he was really happy that they at least apologized. But just going back to what you said earlier, Jake, just have a little compassion for other people. Be a little more considerate of other people, right? Mm-hmm. Even if they have that one and only flight and they desperately need it, doesn't matter. Don't take advantage of that situation. And you're right. I mean, I flew Virgin America just recently, and they're great. Like, sometimes you have really good experiences with certain airlines, but sometimes you have terrible experiences where you're like, wow, do they even care about treating me like a human being right now?
Yeah. And, okay, one super last thing. That's an issue we've touched on before. And so I get, hey, look, they want to make more money, so they're squeezing the seats a little bit more, and we've talked about it. There's also this thing called calculated misery, mm-hmm. where they try to make you more miserable so that you'll upgrade, right? You'll upgrade your seat, you'll upgrade to checking in your carry-on bag, but sometimes they make those areas smaller.
Yes.
Just so you get frustrated, so that you got to check it in and pay $25, right, each way for the bags. And that list of calculated misery goes on and on. So that's why the airline industry gets more complaints than other industries, because they intend it.
They're doing it on purpose.
They're doing it on purpose so that you'll pay them more. So when you know that, it's impossible not to get even angrier at them.
All right. If you like processed meat, it turns out that you could be increasing your risk of cancer. At least that's according to the World Health Organization and new data that they released that is making a lot of Americans upset. So the World Health Organization findings were drafted by a panel of 22 international experts who reviewed decades of research on the link between red meat, processed meat, and cancer. The panel reviewed animal experiments, studies of human diet and health, and cell mechanisms that could lead from red meat to cancer. Now, just to give you a little more background information on this is something that researchers have been looking into for a long time, but they've always been able to find a correlation, right? A person who has a diet high in processed meat is also likely to suffer from certain types of cancer, but they couldn't necessarily find a distinct link. Right? The link is the important thing. And right now, the World Health Organization is saying that they've looked at enough data to say that there's enough of a link to make this statement. It cited studies suggesting that an additional 3.5 ounces of red meat per day raises the risk of colorectal cancer by 17%. Eating an additional 1.8 ounces of processed meat daily raises the risk by 18%. Now, if you look at the grand scheme of things, and you think of all the other things that cause cancer, right, like pollution, for instance, smoking cigarettes, I mean, these numbers are high, but relatively speaking, they're not that high. However, the one point that I want to make about this is, really, is anyone surprised by this information? Even if there is no causation here, or it's hard to prove the causation, we all know that eating processed food isn't good for us. We all know that if we eat too much of it for an extended period of time, it's going to have a negative impact on our health, right? But it's funny to see how the American meat industry and American politicians are responding to this, because they're like, no, there's no way, it's really hard, the methodology, it's wrong. No, we know that it's unhealthy, dude. Just admit to it, everything in moderation, and let's move on with our lives.
Okay, move on, dude. Move on. Okay. So, first of all, you know what doesn't sound fun? Colorectal cancer.
It sounds terrible. I never really hear about that type of cancer, but it happens.
Apparently it happens a decent amount, especially to processed meat eaters. Okay. Yeah. So, here's my take on this. I am an American, and so I read this story. This is literal, okay? While having a Dave's double burger at Wendy's. Okay. And so I was reading it, and I took a bite, and I was like, yeah, well. I took another bite. And so I swear to you, my first reaction was, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay. Why didn't I believe it?
Because you don't want to believe it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the difference between me and the right-wingers is they would just stop right there. I don't believe it. Right? Me, I was like, oh, I'm being a knucklehead. It's obvious that I don't want to believe it because I love meat, right? I like the processed meat, I like the red meat, etc. So now, but to be fair to the critics of this is not as clear-cut as cancer from tobacco, for example. It's not anywhere near as clear-cut as climate science. So even some on the panel 22 scientists that looked at this disagreed, so it was not unanimous. Right?
Not unanimous.
Of course, the American meat industry, which is a $95 billion industry, says, oh my God, it's possible. Ignore that stuff. Obviously, they got 95 billion reasons to come up with alternate science. Come on, be more sophisticated than that.
Yes.
And which I think almost all of you guys are, even right wingers, etc. Like, oh, I get it. Of course, the beef guys are making money off of this.
Right.
But politicians are like, what do you mean? The American Beef Association or whatever it is, right? Well, they say that it's fantastic. Come on. Obviously, they have an incentive. Okay, so, but there are non-meat industry. Wait, how'd you like to be in the meat industry? Hi, how you doing? I'm Bob. I'm from the meat industry. Okay, it just sounds funny. It sounds a little pornish. Anyway, I'm from the beef industry. I make beef and I give it to you. All right, sorry.
My God.
Okay. So, but there are non-meat industry scientists who are also questioning the results.
Yeah, I think the Washington Post did a really good job at analyzing the data, right? It was a very fair way of reporting it, and they talked about why it's so challenging to find causation in studies like this. So let's go to graphic 17A. Experiments to test whether a food causes cancer pose a massive logistical challenge. They require controlling the diets of thousands of test subjects over a course of many years. For example, one group would be assigned to eat lots of meat and others less or more. But for a variety of reasons involving cost and finding test subjects, such experiments are rarely done. They're hard experiments to do, and also there are so many other factors involved in people's lives that can contribute to an increased risk of certain types of cancer. So it's hard for them to pinpoint one specific thing and say, boom, that's what it is, right?
So the North American Meat Institute then decided that they were going to strike back at the World Health Organization, and so they wanted to make fun of them a little bit, and they referred to other research they've done. So they put out this statement. Now, the WHO panel says you can enjoy your yoga class, but don't breathe air, that's a class 1 carcinogen, sit near a sun-filled window, class 1, apply aloe vera, class 2B, if you get a sunburn, drink wine or coffee, class 1 and class 2B, or eat grilled food, class 2A. Like, we got you, man. You looked into everything that causes cancer. Yeah, that's kind of their job. And they decided, hey, yeah, obviously yoga doesn't cause cancer. Go ahead and do yoga, right? And they didn't say don't breathe. They said don't breathe polluted air because pollution will cause cancer.
Yeah.
It's the most obvious thing in the world. They said don't sit in the sun because you can get skin cancer. Said, oh, we're not supposed to sit out in the sun. We're not supposed to breathe. Okay, well, if you want to be a dick about it, you can classify it that way. But you're obviously trying to confuse people.
Right, I know. They're minimizing those studies that they looked at specifically. The health organization is just a bunch of clowns who have no idea.
Yeah, they're fine. You make $95 billion over me. You're not fine. Okay, these scientists are not. So, look, it's not open to show days, and even in well, they ask the question, is everything we eat associated with cancer? And yes, there are some issues with wine apparently and some other things. So I think the right reaction is not all the time. So one extreme is don't eat anything, but just broccoli. Hey, broccoli and rice, and then we're done with it, right? And then the other extreme is, no, I don't care about science. Somebody pass me a hot dog. Okay, you're a knucklehead in one direction, in the other direction, you're not really having too much fun. Okay, so the answer is, hey,
captain of the good ship, pleasure come join my crew in search of adventure. Come pleasure and adventure from the old boat.
A Christian website is advocating that men not fear acting wives after what the study said, especially if their wives are having sex with men.
Right now at the concession
Now, this was written by a man who has apparently written very controversial pieces on this website before, and It's disgusting. So his name is Larry Solomon. He writes for biblicalgenderrules.com. And in his recent...
That's already an awesome website.
How do you read this stuff as a religious person and think to yourself, yeah, I'm into that, especially if you're a woman. But anyway, let me give you some excerpts from it, and then we'll discuss. He says, you also need to realize that whether your wife knows it or not, she needs to have sex too. If you don't have sex with your wife at regular intervals, even sometimes when she is not in the mood, but contests anyway, you will open yourself to temptation. So he's basically saying, like, because if you don't,
the show starts in 4 minutes. And look, you're just trying to help her out, because otherwise you'd have to cheat on her. So just force her into sex instead. The show starts in 3 minutes. Well, glad that I found out about this.
So this guy has written,
the show starts in 2 minutes.
Whatever, articles. He had written something before this, talking about marital rape and how he doesn't actually think marital rape is a thing. He doesn't think it's possible for a man to rape his wife. Now he focuses more on what a man should look at as
in 1 minute.
Right? Focus your eyes on the body, not the face. Focus on the visual pleasure you see from looking at her body and physical pleasure you receive from being inside your wife. You want to connect with her physically and emotionally during sex, but your wife is the one refusing to connect with you emotionally, so you have to concentrate 100% on the physical side.
What the hell is he talking about, man?
Wow.
First of all, here's what I ascertained from this. His wife's not very good looking. He's like, concentrate on the body, because then you can get turned on. If you look at the face, swang, wang, wang. Dude, some of us have hot wives.
Right, no,
you don't mind looking at their face.
I get the sense that his wife is repulsed by him and doesn't want to have sex with him.
Right.
And so as she's begrudgingly sleeping with him, he doesn't want to look at the misery in her face and get turned off by it. That's the sense that I get.
Yeah, and putting the kidding aside, it's not that it's that she's not accepted.
Yes.
So it's like, that's you into your erection. Hoping that she's complaining right?
Turn it up so we can get the whole wide.
Where his priorities are and what you would say, right? So like, I think that infidelity is wrong in relationships. But if I had to choose between my either cheating on me or raping me, I would go on cheating on me, right? Like if you guys were like, you don't want to cheat on me, rape.
I am a loudspeaker. I generate like preacher.
There's more. I gotta revolt them up. He says, I know you love your wife. Most men love their wife. They truly love you. Your beautiful bright face becomes ugly for a sinful time. She is begrudging, giving you sex. This is one who is just sex. But you're giving us
He's just saying it right there. It's like, I mean, right? He says she's wincing in basically pain as you're forcing yourself against their will. It's like, right? It's so distracting. Don't concentrate on that. Just keep looking at her tits. Oh, you don't tell us about this.
Cause we got 3 minutes till I'm out of here. I keep thinking it was
please think the same thing. You just got to get that phone.
3 minutes till I'm out.
The clock is ticking.
The problem with fundamentalists is always they're like, oh yeah, okay, Bible tells you how to do this, right? And part of the problem is that they're half right. In the Bible, it has almost no concern for the wife.
I mean, just read Deuteronomy.
Yeah, and for women in general. It's also true in the Quran, right? Certainly true in the Old Testament. So, God tells Abraham, Sarah can't have kids. Oh, that's okay. Fuck her sister. Okay? And that's in the Bible. Go read it, okay? No, her sister. Oh, that wasn't good enough? Okay, then fuck your maid. Okay? and then fuck your sister's maid. That's in the Bible. I didn't say it, God said it, okay? And then, if you're raping a woman and she doesn't cry enough outside the city walls, then I think we have to stone her to death. But I'm not sure, because there's rules for rape inside city walls and outside city walls.
Yep.
These documents are barbaric because they came about in a time when we were barbaric. Both Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all of them, 1,400 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, when we didn't know anything. And we thought, hey, if a woman isn't screaming while you're raping her outside the city walls, obviously she wanted it, so you stone her to death, right? So that's in the Bible, right? And so the Quran, by the way, brags about how they have much better treatment of women because they give them some property rights and some rights as a witness. Hey, you're worth about a quarter of a man based on witness testimony as an example, which was an improvement upon the Bible, right? But I think God could have done a little better when it came to women, right? So if you're a woman and you don't think that that's right, you think you should be equal to men, you should read your holy text. They kind of disagree. So the sickest part of this is that he's at least half right about the Bible.
I know.
All right. So, okay. That was a cheery way to end.
I know. I just really wanted to get that story in.
I know. It is amazing. Amazing. Of course, we didn't get to the one story that I promised you guys, which was the decline of American brothels.
Oh, I didn't know you were into that story.
Yeah. Who isn't into the... Well, apparently not a lot of people are into the American brothel anymore. That's why they're declining.
Exactly.
That's a swing. We'll save that for another day for you guys. Don't sweat it. We'll be back with that story. Okay, now, for today we're done. But remember, Anna, big story, got engaged over the weekend? No, last week?
Over the weekend, yeah.
Over the weekend, okay. And she's going to tell us all about it. So, tytnetwork.com/subscribe to hear that story. Bye-bye. Not a big deal, just a presidential candidate. Larry Lessig, Harvard law professor and current Democratic presidential candidate, joins us in the studio. Larry, great to have you. All right, we've got a great interview for you guys today on the Young Turks. Not a big deal, just a presidential candidate. Larry Lessig, Harvard law professor and current Democratic presidential candidate, joins us in the studio. Larry, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Jack.
All right. So now, Larry, you're in the middle of a presidential run, and boy, it seems fascinating.
Fascinating is a word you could use to describe this. Not the one I experienced, but okay.
Yeah. Look, it's been a hell of a ride. You got in first as a referendum candidate saying, hey, this is the overall most important issue is equality, and that includes equality of the vote, and hence we've got to get money out of politics. And then you basically got a hard time for your idea of resigning if you wind up getting your mission accomplished. So are you here to say you've changed that plan today?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, what I want to do is to talk about the most important issue facing this democracy today, which is that we have a corrupted representative democracy that doesn't reflect what the American people want. It's corrupted because of the way we fund campaigns. It's corrupted because of the way we gerrymander political districts, so we have this ridiculously polarized House. It's corrupted because we suppress the vote of African Americans by these ridiculous structures that make it hard for them to vote. Okay, all of these are the ways in which it's corrupted. Corruption is the disease, and equality
in each of these areas, equality of citizens would be the solution. I want to have a way to talk about that. So that's why I launched the referendum campaign. I thought we could rally people to this idea if we could talk about it. But of course, what I stupidly didn't recognize was nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that government doesn't work. Those candidates don't want to get up there and promise the moon and then admit, hey, the rocket can't get off the ground. So rather than talk about that, they want to talk about, well, what do you mean you want to resign? So every time I'd get on television and have, 5 minutes to talk about this idea, 4 of those or 3 of those minutes were like, well, you're going to resign. What do you mean you're going to resign? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to resign after we pass the most important democracy legislation in 50 years. Yeah, then I'm going to resign because that's what I'm here for. But nobody could hear the first part, the only important part. So it was like, fine, you win. Democratic Party won't take me seriously because I've said I'm going to resign. I will not resign. I give up that promise, and now let's talk seriously about this issue.
It's kind of funny when you step back for a second. They're like, damn it, we're going to make you a politician. I know you came in as a non-politician and all you cared was, hey, can we fix our democracy? They're like, no, okay, you must stay in power, okay?
It's so weird. It's like, it's like the one field where if you say, hey, look, this is all I want to do. I just want to fix this thing. They're like, we don't trust you. You don't want all power in the world. You must be crazy. Okay, fine. I want all power in the world for a time to fix this democracy, to stay there, to make sure the fix sticks. And I got a lot of other ideas. Like, there is not an internet candidate in this race right now, right? There's, in the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton's not going to talk about the internet because that reminds people of email. So there's not going to be any discussion from her. And Bernie Sanders, God love him, I love a million of the things he's talking about, but he's not an internet kid. He doesn't understand any of these issues. So there are many issues I'd love to have a chance to talk about. So fine, make my day. Now I have to talk about all the issues, including the one that is the most important, getting us this democracy back.
Okay, so you're going to go the full term. Now, of course, one of the ideas was, hey, if they know I'm going to resign and I won't do anything else until I get this done, get money out of politics, right? And the rest of the agenda you just laid out. That was supposed to create pressure on them to act right away. So do you worry that pressure is now relieved a little bit if you do win?
No, I don't think so, because, the history of American presidents is the banner legislation that they say they're going to pass. Congress basically gives that president, whether it's, Obama got the biggest stimulus package since the New Deal within 3 weeks of getting elected, being inaugurated. He got Obamacare within a year and a half. So, every other president too, when they say this is the issue that I want to do, Congress works around to give it to them. And I think with this one, it's going to take enormous pressure because look, the changes that I want to make are changes that radically change power in Washington and radically change Congress, right? And what we've got to do to be able to have the mandate to do that is to have a discussion in the public about why this democracy is so broken and how this change could actually make it so it's a democracy. And when it's framed as an argument about, the equality of citizens, I don't know what the other side says. Like, if I say, no, our problem is we have an unequal democracy, citizens are not equal, we don't have equal power to representative democracy, what are they going to say? No, you shouldn't have equal power to representative democracy. These people deserve more power than you in a representative democracy. That doesn't fly in America. So I think we could actually have a mandate strong enough to say to Congress, fine, you've messed it up over the last 40 years. We're going to fix it. We're going to get a representative democracy. I'm going to hang around long enough to see at least one election where we get a representative democracy, and we'll see what we can do after that.
So in the beginning, they had told you before you entered the race, hey, listen, if you're going to enter the race, Professor Lessig, you're going to need a good amount of money for us to take you seriously, because there's going to be hundreds of people who actually could behind the scenes apply to be the Democratic president, etc. So you raised $1 million, which is more than how many of the candidates?
Well, we raised $1 million. That's more than 2, probably 3, counting our pledges of the Democrats, more than 5 of the Republicans. So, a non-politician steps in, raises money that's competitive in the field. We thought that would be all it took for them to say, okay, fine, you're a serious candidate. But, once I announced after raising $1 million, we got crickets from the Democratic Party. This was the biggest surprise in the campaign.
had really strong support. You got me into this race, but everybody thought once we hit the number, the Democratic Party would say welcome. They didn't say anything. They didn't put a press release out or anything. And once they didn't put a press release out welcoming you to the party, the polls were like, well, this guy's not running. Like, who is this guy? So they wouldn't include me in polls. It was this catch-22. I have to get 1% in the polls to be in the debates, but I'm not in the polls to get the 1% to be in the debates. And so we had this incredible fight to get them to even acknowledge me as a candidate. The insiders, they get to be, up on that stage, but somebody on the outside who actually does more than the insiders has to fight like hell, even to get a telephone call returned. I had this call scheduled with the chair of the Democratic Party, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She canceled the call, said they'd rescheduled, never rescheduled.
But she said that she's talked to you, right?
She said at a press conference before the debate that they've spoken to me. It was unclear from what she said whether she said she's spoken to me or they've spoken to me. No one's spoken to me. Right? I have tried to have a true. It's not true. Plain, it is simply not true. But the point is, I get what's going on. The Democratic Party, Democratic National Committee is not trying to figure out what the Democrats want. They're trying to steer in a particular direction. That's fine. That's the way politics works. But all I'm saying is, they ought to give me a fair shot to be able to present this position. Because we know not a single person on that debate stage said the thing that I would be saying if I were on that debate stage. And, Matt Iglesias has a great piece today in Vox about the hopelessness of the Democratic Party. And I think we ought to be open to ideas that might give us a chance to actually be competitive again.
So, look, I'm going to say something that sounds really grand here, but I need you to understand, for those of you not familiar with Larry Lessig, that he is the godfather of this movement to get money out of politics, to fix the corruption in our system. And I think that the democracy at the national stage is so corrupted that it flat out doesn't exist, right? And the reason I say that is, among other things, a Princeton study that shows there's no correlation between what the public thinks and what the government does. No correlation. That means your democracy is dead. I think it exists at the state level, but not at the national level. And for that movement, honestly, he's a player that is along the lines of Susan B. Anthony for the suffragettes, MLK. It's not to say that you're MLK, okay? I know that that's way overstating him. But for this movement, he is the leader of that movement. And so for a person that has done this, and everybody knows it, it's not like they don't know it at CNN, it's not like they don't know it at DNC, right? For them to exclude him is unbelievable, but it is in some ways, though, Professor Lessig, the most believable thing, because when it comes to money in politics, they all profit from it, and billions of dollars. So this election, they're slated to spend about $10 billion across all of the races, right? So now a lot of that money goes to TV. So somehow you don't wind up in a TV debate. So that's kind of the invisible hand of the market saying, So how does that invisible hand work?
Yeah, my problem is I feel like the last naive guy in the room, right? Because I genuinely believe that people want to do the right thing here, right? And I genuinely believe that there's not a conspiracy going on. Mm-hmm. So I got into this believing that if we could rally people, we would be allowed to at least make
I sent a pizza emoji to...
And I hold on to that naive belief, because how do you get up in the morning if you don't have some hope, some belief that there's a reason to fight? Because if what you're saying is true, there's no reason to fight. You create the biggest news network because there's a thing called the internet that they haven't figured out how to control yet. Like, once the lobbyists reverse the network neutrality victory, then they'll be able to control you. But you're in a space of hope because you've produced something nobody else produced. But this is like, a small part of the mix out there. And if it's true, what you're saying, then, I should just go back to teaching contract law because what the hell else is there?
Okay, so let's break it down a little further, because of course I believe there's hope. First of all, real quick, in our space in media, the latest ComScore reports show us Young Turks doubling MSNBC online and 8 times the size of Fox News online. So now, and to the point about another candidate in the race, Bernie Sanders, who we both like, people keep asking, where did he come from? Where did he come from? Because what they're actually saying is, I don't get it. On TV, we gave him no coverage. How is he this popular? How is he doing so well in the polls? And they don't get it. It's because the internet is where a lot of people are getting their information. They're used to controlling everything. One of the ways that they control everything is they hold the debates. The debates cost about $5 million a piece, right? Somebody's got to pay for that. Who pays for it? The networks pay for it. So when the networks pay for it, they control it completely. So if CNN, MSNBC, Fox News are going to get hundreds of millions of dollars from political advertising, and here's a guy who's threatening to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, it's not a surprise that you're left off in that regard. But I think there can be pressure created to break that system. But let's break it down a little further. First off, what you just said a little while ago actually clarifies things. So sometimes I never believe in a conspiracy. I don't think there's smoke-filled rooms. I don't think they tell Anderson Cooper, hey, don't invite Larry Lessig, right? But sometimes it's a little more crystal clear. So DNC says they talked to you. It turns out they didn't. The DNC says they're open to you. It turns out they're not. So that is a very direct way that the establishment says you're not welcome.
Yeah, that's right. And I can understand why they say I'm not welcome, because, they've got a debate. This is a crazy guy from the outside coming. What kind of trouble is he going to cause? So I understand why they do it. What I don't understand is how they justify it to themselves. I mean, and so, all I'm trying to get is a chance to make this argument, to be able to stand for a principle that I actually think Democrats ought to believe in. Right? And if I had that chance, I'm not interested in getting on stage and trashing Hillary or trashing Bernie. That's not what this is about. This is about making people focus on the dead elephant in the room, right? We've got a democracy that, as you exactly right, does not work. And so when they stand there and they promise single-payer health care, they say we're going to get, increased Social Security, we're going to raise the taxes on the rich, we're going to break up the banks and take on Wall Street and pass Glass-Steagall. I'm sitting on the one hand thinking, oh my God, that would be great, that would be amazing. And the other hand thinking, are you kidding? What are you talking about? So I was on Bill Maher, and Bill Maher, I really, he's a strong Bernie supporter, but I had a really aggressive interview with Bernie where he's basically, cornering Bernie on the fact that what Bernie's talking about is going to be so incredibly expensive. How do you pay for this? And who are you going to have to tax? You can't just increase the taxes of the 1%. You're going to have to. So it was a kind of an uncomfortable interview to watch. But afterwards, I said to Bill, you're just missing the point. The question isn't whether America can pay for what Bernie's talking about. Of course we can. If we can spend $1 trillion to fight a losing war in Iraq, we can spend $1 trillion to make America great again, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, how does he think he's going to get any of those things passed until he takes on this corruption first? And what he is not doing, as much as I love the guy and what he's pushing for substantively, he is not explaining to the American people how and why we need to fix this democracy first. We had a Democratic debate. The words public funding were not mentioned in this debate. Not once. Not a single member of that Democratic said, the most obvious thing that we could do tomorrow. They all say things, they didn't even say this, but they see things like, oh my gosh, we're gonna pass a constitutional amendment. Now you and I, who have been fighting for the only path to get an amendment, which is, through an Article 5 convention, that of course is nowhere even close to their radar. They're talking about Congress proposing an amendment. And people like you and I said, are you nuts? There is no way 2/3 of Congress could propose an amendment to deal with the Citizens United issue.
So again, as much as I deeply respect Bernie Sanders and his track record of progressivism, I don't just say that blithely. I absolutely
know you
believe
absolutely.
it, right? But I'm afraid that he does not have a great understanding of how that solution would come to pass. So he had the best line of the debate, and to be fair to him, he's the only one that mentioned the money in politics at all in the debate, which is amazing.
11 times he mentioned it. 11 times.
Right. But when you get into the nitty-gritty of this issue, and like I said, he had the best line. He said, Wall Street doesn't regulate Congress. I'm sorry, Congress doesn't regulate Wall Street. Wall Street regulates Congress. That's absolutely true. So he knows, but then you got to attack that first. If you don't attack that, then Wall Street's going to regulate Congress, and you're not going to get anything done.
That was a great line, but I actually think the better line, he said, quote, we got to realize nothing is going to happen until we deal with the campaign finance. And I'm like, okay, Bernie, exactly right. So why aren't we saying the first thing we got to deal with is this corrupted system? And here's what we could do on day one. We could pass citizen-funded elections. We could radically change the way campaigns are funded. We could change the gerrymandered system so that instead of politicians picking voters, voters could begin to pick politicians. We could do that on day one. But these solutions are just nothing they want to talk about, because the consultants, I think, tell them, you're not going to be able to win an election by talking about those sorts of things. You're going to be promising the moon. But the problem with promising the moon is when they get there, turns out there's no will to actually take on the corruption.
If you're going to go to the moon, you got to build a spaceship first. And then I got to know, do you have a good plan for building a spaceship? Right? If you tell me, and you pull a Trump and you say, I'll figure out foreign policy when I get into the office. You're like, no, you can't do that with a spaceship. You got to build it right. So I want to go back to the invisible hand for a second, because you hear they exclude you from the first Democratic debate, and then Anderson Cooper, CNN, doesn't ask a single question about getting money out of politics, when it polls as one of the top two concerns of the American people in every single poll, okay? The economy and getting money out of politics and the corruption of politics. Recent Bloomberg poll, 80% of Republicans say it's corrupting our politics. 80% of Republicans, 83% of Democrats, right? Not a single question about it, right? So
they have to talk about email scandal.
over and over again, right? So do you think that that's an active decision they're making, or if not, how? I don't think they told Anderson Cooper, hey, don't talk about money out of politics because that'll cost us billions of dollars. Yeah. So how do they all know not to talk about it?
See, what drives me nuts is that there's a conventional wisdom that, as most of these conventional wisdoms, has no actual basis in fact. The conventional wisdom is Americans don't care about this issue. They say they care about it, but they're lying. So they say 85% of Democrats, 80% of Republicans say this is a corrupt system, we need to fix it, but in fact they don't care about it. So when Anderson Cooper thinks, what am I going to talk about, the most important issues, I'm going to talk about, issues people really care about. Hillary Clinton's email. That's what they really care about. And you're like, what's so amazing about that exchange is the whole audience erupts with outrage at he's asking the question. He's sitting there saying, no, the American people want to hear about this. And you're like, really? Really, the American people? They spent more time, the media spent more time talking about Hillary Clinton's email than the total amount of time that Bernie Sanders was talked about in mainstream media. I mean, it's ridiculous. So they have this perception of what the American people care about, and they impose it on the American people. But here's the reality. This is why they think this. The American people care about this issue. We did a poll found 96% of Americans thought it important to reduce the influence of money in politics. But the American people don't think there's anything that can be done about it. 91% said that there was no way to solve the problem of money in politics. So you put those numbers together, the American people are just resigned. They just think, this is like death, taxes, and a corrupt government. That's like the modern version of Franklin's aphorism. But if you give them an actual picture of what they could do, I know this will break out an extraordinary amount of energy to try to reform that, which is why it is so important for those candidates to begin to explain to the American people, there is something we can do on day one. Not, we're going to sit around waiting for a Supreme Court justice to die so we can appoint a new Supreme Court justice, or, I'm going to get Congress to pass an amendment, send an amendment out to the states to ratify an amendment. Not these completely useless strategies for dealing with this on day one, but things they could do on day one. Things that, they've begun to talk about, which is change the way elections are funded, and things that not a single one of them is talking about, which is changing the way Congress gets constituted so it's not this polarized, dysfunctional institution that it is right now.
Yeah, look, I don't talk about gerrymandering much, and I think getting money out of politics in other ways, public financing, in my view, corporate personhood's an issue. Corporations having human rights is, I find, preposterous. But if we did talk about gerrymandering, that is a debate you would win with maybe 99% of the American
exactly right.
people, right? How can they possibly argue, the politicians should pick their voters,
right? But
we should make up these districts that look like this, so I win all the time.
Exactly.
It is an unwinnable argument.
Yeah, and what's so striking is it's unwinnable, and yet 90% of Americans don't realize Congress could fix it tomorrow. 90% of Americans think, to the extent they think at all about it, well, this is something that's done in the states, it happens every 10 years, you've got to take over the state legislatures. That's wrong. The Constitution explicitly reserves to Congress the power to set the rules for the selecting of Congress. And Congress has historically had radically different rules. So at the founding, there were multi-member districts. And if you have a multi-member district with ranked choice voting, let's say you have 5 representatives you're picking in a district with ranked choice voting. If you represent 20% of that district, you're going to get a representative, right? Your view is going to have a representative. So instead of this system where we have 90 seats, probably, some people say 538 says it's only about 50 seats. But let's be optimistic, 90 seats competitive in the United States House, which means 345 seats, which are not competitive, safe seats, which means if you're the minority in those 345 seats, then you don't have a representative because your representative would care about you. You could never possibly matter to that representative, which means 89 million Americans don't have representation in our Congress. That should be an outrage. Like, when African Americans didn't have representation, it took us, 100 years to finally get around to dealing with the problem, but that was an outrage. But it's nowhere close to 89 million Americans. 89 million Americans don't have a representative in Congress. And we could change that in one statute. Fair Vote, an amazing nonpartisan organization that's been working on this for decades, has a proposal where one vote, we could change this. We could create districts that made it possible for people to have representation. And what that would do is destroy this polarizing amplification of the existing House. You wouldn't have, 30 crazies who could basically block the ability of government to function, because you'd have a much more representative. It would be a Congress that looks like America. And let me tell you, I love America. It is a much more attractive place than the United States House of Representatives makes it look.
So, look, I'm going to reiterate that gerrymandering is at most a number 2 issue for me. But if you were to come in and you were to win and you were to just change the gerrymandering, but that alone would be the most historic presidency. Because I need people to understand this. It isn't about the person, right? It's if you can get institutional change, that's so much more important than winning on any single policy, because the institutional change affects all policies.
Now,
so when President Obama says, Obamacare, I did historic this and I did historic financial reform, please, on the historic financial reform. But no, if you had changed the placards, remember the placards changed? If you had changed the system, then you could have won on so many fronts. On gerrymandering alone, if you can get that done, it would be actually historic. It would be a game changer.
And what's so puzzling to me is, when I got into this, there was a time I was trying to push that slogan, first a principle, then a precedent, because I wanted people to recognize I'm just fighting for a principle that makes all this other stuff possible. And people come back with, oh, Jesus, you're just a one issue candidate. And I'm like, when did democracy become a single issue? And another part about that is, 50 years ago, when the civil rights movement focused on the need to get voting rights reform, because what they realized is they needed to have the vote if they were going to have a chance to do anything else. There weren't people who said, whoa, we shouldn't be worrying about the single issue. We worried about these other issues. And, if anybody said that, the obvious answer would be, we only get to have those other issues solved if we solve this issue first. So damn right we're going to fight for this issue first. We're going to fight for a democracy first. When guys go off to war, women go off to war, and they fight for, quote, democracy, but people say, what, are you just a single issue warrior, or you're fighting just for democracy? No, I'm fighting for the most important thing that gives us a chance to solve our problems, because we don't have that right now. We don't have anything close to a representative democracy right now.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a great point. You could apply it again to the suffragettes to say, hey, why do you guys care about this one single issue about, you want to vote? Well, why don't you care about the environment? Well, I can't do anything about the environment if I don't have a vote. I got to solve that first, right? And we're in the same exact situation now, unfortunately. It doesn't apply to just African Americans or just to women. It applies to the whole country. We've lost our vote.
All of us, right? So it's like, if you think, you look at the number of people who actually give just a maximum contribution to a single candidate. People in Washington wouldn't think those are the power brokers, but let's just start with that. That's about 57,000 Americans, which means about 0.02% of America is giving even the maximum contribution to a single candidate. So if you think 99.98% of America doesn't have the power that that tiny, tiny fraction does. You would think that the 99.98% would say, hell no, we're going to fight for democracy. And in fact, remember exactly a year ago in Hong Kong, when they were bringing the government to a standstill, when the students went out and they were protesting because Hong Kong set up the system where 0.02%, literally 0.02%, 1,200 Hong Kong citizens had the power to pick the candidates that the rest of Hong Kong got to vote among. And they said, this is not a democracy. We're not going to let this happen. So they brought the city to a standstill because they were fighting for the right to a democracy. Well, what they were fighting against is exactly what we have. Because this 1,200, this 0.02% who get to pick the candidates, the guys who fund the campaigns, they pick the candidates that the rest of us get to vote among. The only way you get to be a credible member of candidate for Congress is if you can raise the money. So the Democratic Party tells you, can you guarantee $500,000? Then you're allowed to run for Congress. So the funders pick the candidates that the rest of us get to vote among. And okay, who are the funders? The funders are a completely unrepresentative slice of the tiniest fraction of the 1%. So the idea that we allow that to survive as democracy in America is outrageous. It's outrageous. And nobody in our tradition, from Madison on, would have justified this as the picture of American democracy.
And so, of course, the establishment media would be outraged at this suggestion. What do you mean? In China, it's the Politburo or the Communist Party, and so they won't let anybody run that's outside their candidates. Whereas in America, anybody can run. Now, you can run, but the DNC won't call you. We'll tell people not to have you in the polls or in the debates. And then the media organizations who get a tremendous amount of money from those groups will say you're excluded. So can you really run? And in fact, now that we're talking it through, you're almost a litmus test to whether we have a real democracy. Can anyone really run? I mean, it's not like you're a plumber or you're in construction and you're a Harvard law professor who's very well respected, not just in the internet and in the causes that you're celebrated for, but they know, the mainstream media knows, the parties know, they know who you are, right? If they don't let you run by excluding you from polling and debate, etc., that means no, that's it, it's over. We're just like the Chinese communists. Our leaders pick who's allowed to run, and then we have a false choice between those that the establishment handpicked for us.
Yeah, a mutual friend, Ryan Clayton, was trying to convince me that the way to frame this problem is to say, does anybody have a chance to run for office? And I said, Ryan, I don't think that's the way to think about it, because most people don't think they should be able to run. But this whole experience has brought me around to recognize exactly this. Do we have a democracy where anybody other than billionaires or insiders are allowed to run? Because, look, if I were a billionaire, there'd be no question I'd be on that debate stage.
No question.
If I were a senator, I could have spent the last 2 years running for president, my salary paid for by the United States Senate while I'm not being a senator, right? But because I'm not an insider or a billionaire, when I run, I got to give up my salary. I can't get paid by my university. And I'm not even allowed to be paid by my campaign until 2 months before the primary. So there's this window, how long can I live on credit cards and savings with 3 kids and a wife who's a public interest lawyer, which, defines my opportunity. So what we thought was, okay, that's tough. It's a difficult thing to do. But if they treat us fairly, we should have a shot. We should have a shot because raising that money in that amount of time demonstrates this is a real issue. I've been in this fight since our mutual friend Aaron Swartz came to me and said, what the hell are you doing fighting for all these issues like internet, copyright, when we have this corrupted system that will make it impossible to... He convinced me 9 years ago to give up my own work to focus on this fundamental issue. And I thought we could have a shot at me saying the same thing that Aaron said to me to those Democrats, saying, what are you talking about? You can't get those things until you deal with this issue first. And I wouldn't be as persuasive as Aaron was, no doubt. But I think we ought to have a chance to make this point clear to the American people, that what Aaron said to me is true. We cannot solve these problems until we deal with this issue first. My book, Republic Lost, opens with your a quote from you at Netroots, where you said there's one issue in America: campaign finance reform. Now, Netroots Nation audience is pretty smart. They were confused when you said that, to think, whoa, we've solved climate change, Cenk? We don't have a problem with income inequality in America? No, they got what you meant, which is there's no way we deal with these other issues till we deal with this issue first. That's what Aaron said to me. That's what I'm trying to say on this debate stage, and that's, in a real sense, what the insiders don't want said on the debate stage.
Yeah, so it turns out there's two layers to fixing free and fair elections. We thought there was one layer. If you got elected, that you could insist on this reform that it makes institutional change. It turns out there's two layers. Can you even get on a stage? Can you even be recognized? And that is the first step in whether we have free and fair elections. Are they fair? Are they fair? Or are they only open to the incredibly wealthy and the incredibly well-connected? So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on with your campaign lately. So are they including you in the latest polls, or are they still have blockade for future debates?
We don't know what the practice is. We've been included in a couple, but not, certainly not the majority, anywhere close. We're not even clear what the rules are for the second debate yet. So, my staff is talking to staff at DNC to try to figure out exactly what, the rules are going to be, so we know what we at least have to be fighting for, aiming for. But, it's incredible obscurity. Our mutual friend, a Republican, Buddy Roemer, kind of experienced a little bit of the same of this 4 years ago. Yeah. When, as a Republican, each time he crossed the line, they first said you needed 1%. He got 1%. Then they said you needed, I think, 5%. He got that. And then they said you needed to have raised $500,000 in the prior 6 weeks. Now, Buddy, unlike me, was running a campaign where he said, I'm not going to take anything more than $100 from anybody. So he said, what do you tell you? My whole campaign is about the money. You can't tell me I got to give up my core principle in order to be able to run. And they said, Buddy, it's just the rules. So what we're fearful of is that, this is going to be an evolving standard, always the bar right beyond where, it's possible for me to be that.
It's funny because we just said billionaires and insiders, but Buddy was an insider. He was a congressman and he was a governor, right? You can't get any more legitimate than that, right? And they were still like, no, you believe in getting money out of politics.
Yeah.
Even if you're an insider, it doesn't matter who the hell you are.
Right. Well, they feared. It turns out billionaires have more power than the insiders because they feared he would do what Donald Trump did. They feared he would get on that stage. And, Donald Trump is a clown. Buddy Roemer is a serious, political person who is the best debater I have ever seen. So he would get on that stage. He would rip those people apart because of the influence of money. The way Donald Trump did when he said, look, I own all of you guys. I own Hillary Clinton. She comes to my wedding because I give her money. He said what they didn't want Buddy Roemer to say. But what was so valuable about what he said, and we could go on and we should go on about the million other things he said, which are horrible. But the valuable thing about what he said is he made it credible on the Republican side for people to begin to acknowledge the corruption that we know 80% of the Republican base already believes is there.
That's right. And so I realized in the beginning, again, I was confused because DNC, in my opinion, is clearly working on behalf of Hillary Clinton. I mean, she is the establishment. They view her as a front runner. That's why they don't want to have too many debates. They can go cry me a river about what, no, that's categorically untrue. Sure. Okay. So then I figured, well, you're a progressive candidate. They might think, hey, you might take votes away from Bernie Sanders. Maybe we should let this guy in. So I was a little puzzled as to why Hillary's camp wouldn't want you in. And then I realized, if you're on the debate stage, who takes the most money in politics and who's going to get most embarrassed by the questions, the hard questions that you'd be asking? And the answer is clearly Hillary Clinton. So, I don't know to what degree you know or don't know, but how much is the DNC in bed with Hillary Clinton?
I think the view is that, the people electing the DNC were selected to guide this through to the place where she would be the nominee. In a certain sense, I get that. She's paid her dues. She's suffered ridiculous attacks, partisan attacks. This Benghazi Commission right now is another example of the most ridiculous government money being spent for a political attack on her. There is nothing there to be attacking her about, but they go on and on. It's just like the Whitewater fight. All of that I understand in some sense, in some deep justice sense, you'd say, okay, fine, she's entitled, and we're going to let this happen. She's got the biggest war chest, the ability to pull together the money we need to defeat the Republicans. That I get why they would do that. And in fact, when we first started talking about this, we had some calls with people inside the DNC who said, yeah, they should love you being up there because they'll think you'll just strengthen the opportunity for Hillary to be nominated. But I actually think, it's not just Hillary. Bernie has not said Lessig got to be on that stage. Mm-hmm. A lot of people on Twitter are like, yeah, Bernie, you ought to be supporting the idea that Lessig should be on that stage, right? Because, in some sense, what I'm saying, of course, is the thing that's closest to Bernie. But what I'm saying is something that Bernie's not yet willing to say, which is, look, America, we don't have a democracy until we fix this corrupted system. And it's not just money in politics. It's all the ways in which we don't have a representative democracy, and we've got to fight for that. He's not willing to talk about that. We've primed him. I pushed him. After I got into this race, Politico received a memo that I had written for Bernie. And they received it from the Bernie campaign because I didn't give it to them. And in that memo, I said, Bernie, we were talking about what the position should be that he takes on money in politics. And I said, this is the right amendment to be supporting, and this is the right small dollar public funding you ought to be supporting. But what you've got to do, more than any of that, is you've got to convince the American people they need to do this first. Because if you don't, then when you get to the general election, it's going to be trivial for the Republicans to say, what are you talking about? Changing, single-payer health care. What are you talking about? That's not possible. And everybody will realize it's not possible, not because we can't afford it, but because we don't have a democracy that would give us what the people actually want. So I said, you need to focus on making this the fundamental issue. And their answer was no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do like every other political campaign. We're going to go out and promise the moon. And my own view is, look, I want the moon. I want to get to the moon. But I think there's something, it almost feels like a moral issue to me. If you continue this game, this charade of fantasy politics, you're responsible for the charade of fantasy politics. If you're not willing to stand up and say, look, America, we don't have a democracy and we got to fix this, then you are in part causing the fact we don't have a democracy and it's not going to get fixed. So, and one part of me is like, I love what you're saying. Another part of me is like, God damn it. How the hell is this? That yet again, we're having an election where we're pretending we have a democracy. How is that possible? After Obama, like these kids that are rallying to Bernie, maybe they weren't there 8 years ago when you and I were there watching this amazing man get elected. In 2007, 2008, up until April of 2008, he said again and again, if we don't take up the fight, change the way Washington works, then real change that will make a lasting difference in the lives of ordinary Americans will keep getting blocked by the defenders of the status quo. That is a precise quote. That's what he said again and again and again. But what did he do when he got down there? Forgot that he needed to take up the fight. Didn't take up the fight. So, do we have any change in the system? Zero. He didn't even try. He didn't even propose a bill. He didn't even talk about proposing a bill that would change the system. So my point is, there's a moral question here. A moral question. How do you run for President of the United States in 2016 and not make this the fundamental issue? How do you justify pretending that, all we have to do is to elect another Superman, right? Because, look, whether it's Superman or Superwoman, Washington is Krypton. And when Superman and Superwoman walks into Krypton, they lose their power. So I don't care whether this is the most powerful Superman in the world, Bernie, or Superwoman in the world, Hillary. I don't care what powers they seem to have when the American people listen to them and get all rallied up with it. When they get to Washington, they will have no power unless they rally America to the idea we have to fix this goddamn democracy first.
The Black Lives Matter movement gets criticism from the Fox News and the right wing all the time for, hey, you should say all lives matter, right? Now, I don't want to get into that. That's they're trying to misdirect people.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But in this case, I love the conversation we were having earlier about how women were fighting for their right to vote because that was the only issue for them. They couldn't participate in the process if they didn't win on this issue. Same for the civil rights movement, right? So in this case, all votes matter is the right slogan, right? In that sense, right? All of our votes have been taken away through gerrymandering, through money in politics, through this completely corrupt system. If we don't fix that first, we can't have it. I know we've said it many times, but hey, you're right. I have a quote from President Obama in my pocket. I keep it with me all the time when he said, I don't want to just play the same old Washington game a little better. I want to change the way the game is played.
Right.
And then he got into Krypton. And, I mean, remember, Obama used to have the Superman, drawings of him in the outfit and everything. He got into Krypton, Washington, and didn't do one thing about the way the game is played.
Right. Exactly right.
So we all know it. Okay, the final couple things is about.
But let's not drop the Black Lives Matter point for a minute. I think it's really important. The first campaign stop I had was in Ferguson. I spent 3 hours in a basement room with about 50 of the Ferguson activists, listening to them tell the story about what it's like to be, in that context in Ferguson as an African American. And what I think the meaning of Black Lives Matter is, people are focusing on the black part. The thing to focus on is the lives part. When you have a system of fundamental inequality, what that does is systematically disempower people. And in America, to be disempowered as a black person means it's not just that you're not getting roads built or that ambulances take longer to get to an emergency. It's that your life is not respected. So that you are actually risking your life to be a black person driving in certain areas because we have institutionalized this idea of inequality so deeply in America. Ferguson is like an amazing example of how they've structured their tax system to basically tax through fines. It's taxation through citation. And police officers aren't police officers, they're tax collectors. So you park your car, you get a traffic violation. You don't pay that parking fine on time. You get a fine on top of that. You don't pay that in time. You get an arrest warrant out for you. You're facing $500 because, and these are not people who have $500. So they've just decided in this county that the simplest way to raise money is to tax the least empowered political group, because what are they going to do? They're going to elect a candidate to overturn that decision by the political power. This is just a manifestation of the inequality that this campaign ought to be about. And if we could have a campaign where we actually talk about equality as the solution to the corruption of our problem, we could stand with our black brothers and sisters and say, yes, what you're saying is just the most profound instantiation of this fundamental problem. It is the one we have to attack first. I completely agree, but it's the same problem that we all face. We don't have a democracy. The idea there isn't second-class citizens in America. It's kind of a joke, right? We have this rhetoric, this historical rhetoric. There are no second-class citizens in America. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? It is defined as a system that creates second-class. It's not. We've got business class, and then we have second class. That's the rest of us. And until we find a way to rally people to fight that, we're not going to get anything. And until we have Democratic candidates who are even willing to say that, we're not going to get anything. And not one of them is saying that now.
Okay. Ironically, the conservatives worry about a tyrannical government. But there is a tyrannical government that says, I'm going to turn my police officers into tax collectors. But they're going to be able to do it with a gun, right?
And that is what we have. That's what they have.
And there you have it. And then they, of course, ironically turn around and back that system. Right? It's happening before your eyes. It's like now we're all black, right? What blacks in America faced for a long time, including today, we all now face, because if you're not a billionaire and you're not an insider, we're all in.
Yeah, in one sense, I completely agree with you. Of course, we are all in that sense unequal. But of course, we're not all black in the sense that you and I don't worry about teaching our son how he needs to deal with a police officer when he gets stopped. Like, if you're an African-American father and you don't teach your child how to deal with a police officer, that is malpractice as a father. But, I don't need to worry about that with my kid. Why? Because my kid is white. My kid is white. And so, in one sense, that's right, and we ought to rally people to recognize that. But we can't forget the absurd history in America of this fight to achieve equality on the basis of race, which is the biggest stain in our history. And we still are nowhere close to addressing that adequately.
As much as they have disempowered us, blacks continue to be disempowered even more. Of course, that's true. All right, so finally, what's next for the campaign? So you're fighting this fight to get in, and I don't know if we should do hashtag Let Lessig in.
It's a big hashtag Let Lessig debate. That's
yeah. At a minimum, hashtag Let Lessig debate, right? But what beyond that?
Well, the big question now is whether we can get in the second debate. And that's the big fight we're having right now. And that's all I want. And that's what I want the chance to do, to be able to present this in the Democratic Party, because I think if it's presented, there's a real chance it moves the election. This principle becomes central. A lot of people are saying, look, if they don't let you run as a Democrat, run as an independent. And in one sense, this is the last thing I want to do. But there's another part of me that says, well, geez, it turns out there's a second thing Donald Trump said, which I think is right. Donald Trump on the one hand said, money is corrupting the system. He was right about that. The other thing he said was, if the Republicans won't treat me fairly, then why should they stick with the Republican Party? Well, okay, I think they've treated Donald Trump fairly. I think that guy's gotten enough coverage. We spent 8 weeks liming the depths of Donald Trump's brain. And as a teacher, let me tell you, it doesn't take 8 weeks to understand the depths of Donald Trump's brain. So he's gotten fair treatment. But the question is, if they don't allow an outsider in the Democratic Party to stand on that stage fairly, they have an unfair system to make that happen, then what people are saying, I think, has some argument, there's some pressure behind it. I don't want to be there, because I think this is the sort of issue that ought to be raised and argued for in a Democratic primary, and that's what I'm fighting for.
And Green Party and other independents have said for years and years, decades, the Democratic Party is part of the establishment, right? And so you're never going to get anywhere within the Democratic Party. Again, you appear to be a litmus test. Are they going to treat you with even the modicum of fairness? And if they don't, then they've announced, okay, we are the Democratic Party, we are the establishment. There will be no alternative voices, and we're done with that. Okay, you can argue to try to change things policy-wise, because we know you can't anyway. Good luck with that, right? But you cannot argue to change the system, because the Democratic Party is the system, right? So we'll see. If they let you in the debates, maybe all those guys were mistaken, and the Democratic Party is open to other voices. If they don't, then they've made it incredibly clear.
Yeah. It's the reality. The biggest party in America is none of the above. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party both are minorities. A higher percentage of Americans associate as independent than either of these two. But we have a political system that basically says, if you want to run as an independent, good luck. Good luck with that. Because you can't even get on the ballots. You spend millions of dollars to qualify to get on the ballots. Last election cycle, there was a group called Americans Elect. They spent $50 million trying to build an infrastructure to allow somebody to get onto the ballot. After spending $50 million, they thought they could get with another $10 or $20 million to being on the ballots for everybody, but for every state, but they weren't absolutely convinced. So the idea that we have a system where the minority parties actually decide who is going to be the president, like they give us the choice: do you support Lenin or Trotsky? So people, those of us who don't like either of them, still have to choose between Lenin and Trotsky, right? They give us that system. The idea that that's acceptable is really quite outrageous. So I, believe in the values of the Democratic Party. I don't believe in the system that blocks the opportunity for independents to participate just as openly and vigorously.
And I was just in D.C. 2 weeks ago, and when I brought up the idea of hey, maybe Lessig could run as an independent, the Democratic Party spits in his face and says we're not going to allow you in. But it's not a personal thing. So it's not about spitting in the face as much as it is, well, you're not allowed to get your idea out. Well, then I have to have some outlet for getting my idea out, right? People were like, no, that's outrageous. Conventional wisdom is you can't run as an independent. Then I brought up Bloomberg, because everybody's buzzing about Bloomberg possibly running as independent. They're like, that's wonderful. Why? Because he's a billionaire. And since he's a billionaire, he can do whatever he wants, and wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, I don't think they get the plutocracy that they're arguing for. I mean, it's in the same conversation. How do you not see it? But they don't see it. So there's only one option left. Make them see it. Right? So, all right. Campaign website for everybody.
Lessig2016.us. Lessig. Not Doris Lessing, but Lessig, Lessig, 2016.us.
Okay, and look, obviously I'm a supporter. We don't hide that here, right? And so I don't support you, Larry, because you and I go way back, and we had lunch together, and I really like you as a person. You're lovely as a person, but I support you because we agreed. If we don't get our vote back, if we don't get our democracy back, then the rest is all a joke anyway. And in fact, it's designed to be kabuki theater, to distract you from the real issue at hand. And you're trying to get people to focus on that issue. For that, I thank you, and I appreciate you coming.
Thanks,
thank you so much.